They say the moon never makes mistakes. They say she chooses with perfect sight, reaching down through darkness and blood and bone, and she places her mark exactly where it belongs. I believed that once. I believed it the way a child believes in warmth, without question, without proof, just the simple, aching certainty that something in this world was built to protect you. I was wrong. Or maybe, and this is the part that still keeps me awake long after the fire dies and the hall goes silent, maybe the moon was never wrong at all. Maybe I was. My name is Seren. Not the name people say with reverence. Not the name that made warriors stand straighter when it passed through a room. That name belonged to my sister, Lyra, and she wore it the way she wore everything else. Beautifully. Effortlessly. Like she had been sewn together by hands that only knew how to make perfect things. I was the other one. The quiet one. The one who walked 3 steps behind, who sat at the edge of feasts, who learned early that the fastest way to survive in a room full of powerful people was to make yourself small enough that they stopped noticing you were there. I had mastered that art. I had mastered it so completely that even I sometimes forgot what I looked like when no one was watching. The night everything changed, I was standing at the edge of the sacred clearing. Torchlight threw long shadows across the stone altar. The elders stood in a half-moon formation, their silver-threaded robes stirring in the cold wind. And in the center of all of it, tall, broad, terrifying in the way that only true power can be terrifying, stood Alpha Caelum Drevon. The most feared Alpha in 3 territories. The man the packs called the Iron Wolf. The man whose hands, they said, had never trembled. He wasn't looking at me. He never looked at me. He was looking at Lyra. And Lyra, radiant, golden, chosen, was already lifting her chin toward him like a flower that had always known which direction the sun would rise. I watched him reach for her hand. I watched the elder bind their wrists with the crimson thread. I watched my sister become the Alpha's mate in front of every living soul in our pack. And deep inside me, deep in a place I hadn't known existed until that exact moment, something cracked open. Not broke. Cracked. Like a fault line splitting apart beneath still water. Like something that had been waiting, very quietly, for a very long time. I pressed my hand flat against my chest. I told myself it was grief. I told myself it was loneliness. I told myself every comfortable lie I had available to me. But the moon was watching. And she knew the truth before I did. He chose my sister. He dreamed of me. And nothing, not bloodlines, not ceremony, not the iron will of the most powerful Alpha alive, nothing could stop what the moon had already decided. This is where our story begins. Chapter 1. The torches smelled of pine resin and old smoke. That's the thing people never mention about sacred ceremonies. They talk about the power. The tradition. The gravity of the moment pressing down on everyone present like a second sky. Nobody mentions the smell. But I noticed it, the way I always noticed the things no one else thought worth observing. Pine resin, old smoke, and beneath that, something sharper. Something alive. Him. Even across the clearing, I could detect it. Caelum Drevon smelled like a storm that had already decided where it was going to strike. Wood smoke and iron and cold night air, not the artificial cold of approaching winter, but the deep, ancient cold that lives inside mountains and never entirely leaves. I pressed my back harder against the oak tree I'd chosen as my boundary. Close enough to witness. Far enough to stay invisible. That was the arrangement I had made with myself the moment my father had announced this ceremony 3 days ago. The moment he'd come into the hall with his chest out and his eyes bright and told us that Alpha Drevon had chosen our bloodline for the sacred mating bond. Had chosen Lyra. Of course he had. My sister stood at the altar now, and I will say this honestly, because bitterness was never something I allowed myself. She was extraordinary. Lyra was the kind of woman who didn't need to try. Her hair was a deep, honey gold that caught every source of light in a room and held it hostage. Her features were sharp and elegant, the face of someone who had been born knowing they were meant to be seen. And she was kind, too. That was the part that made everything harder. She wasn't cruel to me. She wasn't dismissive. She loved me, in the easy, uncomplicated way that people love things they've never had to fight for. She just never noticed the difference between loving someone and truly seeing them. Neither did anyone else. The elder Rowan, ancient as the stones beneath his feet, raised both arms and began the binding words. I had heard them before. Every wolf in our pack had heard them. The old tongue, rough and rhythmic, the syllables worn smooth by centuries of use. Two souls called. Two paths joined. Moon witness. Blood witness. Bond eternal. Caelum Drevon stood facing my sister, and I watched him the way I always watched things, from a safe distance, cataloging details the way some people collect stones or scars. He was larger than I remembered from the last summit gathering. He was always large, the stories made sure you knew that before you ever met him. 6.5 feet of alpha bloodline, shoulders built like fortress walls, jaw set with the particular kind of certainty that comes not from arrogance but from never once having reason to doubt yourself. But tonight, up close, in firelight, he was something else entirely. Something that made the air feel thinner near him. Something that made the old, quiet part of me, the part one kept locked in the dark, pull toward him like a tide responding to a moon it wasn't supposed to know. I dug my fingernails into the bark of the oak tree. Stop it, I told myself. Stop it right now. Elder Rowan lifted the crimson thread. The crowd stilled. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And then, in that perfect, suspended silence, Caelum Drevon turned his head. Not toward my sister. Toward me. It was barely a moment. A fraction of a second. His gaze swept the edge of the clearing, and for just one breath, his eyes found mine. Dark eyes. Wolf's eyes. The color of deep forest at midnight. Something crossed his face that I couldn't name. Not recognition. Not curiosity. Something older than both of those things. Then Elder Rowan cleared his throat, and Caelum's gaze snapped back to Lyra. His expression closed like a door shutting. Like it had never opened at all. I exhaled. I told myself I had imagined it. I almost believed myself. The thread wound around their wrists, crimson against pale skin, and Elder Rowan spoke the final words of binding. The pack howled. All around me, voices lifted into the night sky, the ancient chorus of wolves acknowledging their alpha's bond, their collective cry rolling outward through the trees and up into the stars. I didn't howl. I stood very still at the edge of everything, my hand pressed to my sternum, and I felt it. A sensation I had no name for. Like something being severed. Like a door closing in a room I had never been allowed to enter. It doesn't matter, I told myself. You don't feel things about him. You never did. But beneath my palm, something ached with a knowledge I couldn't silence. And up above, behind the thin layer of clouds that had drifted across the sky, the moon watched. And did not look away. The celebration began immediately after. Long tables had been arranged in the pack hall, torchlit, loud, warm with the press of bodies and the smell of roasted meat and mead. Warriors clapped each other on the back. Women leaned together, whispering. Children chased each other between the legs of elders who pretended not to notice. I found a seat at the far end of the left table. As far from the alpha's dais as geometry would allow. My father found me within minutes. He was a broad man, my father. Big-chested and silver-templed, with the particular energy of someone who had spent his entire life calculating exactly how much each person in the room was worth to him. There you are. He sat down beside me without invitation. Why were you hiding at the tree line during the ceremony? I wasn't hiding. I was watching. Same thing. He reached past me for a cup of mead. You should have been up front. Beside your sister. This is our family's greatest moment, Seren. Even you should understand that. Even you. The words landed the way they always did, flat and quiet, without drama. He didn't mean them as wounds. That was what made them so effective. I understand, I said. Lyra will need you close in the coming weeks, he continued, already scanning the room for more important conversations. As she settles into her role as Alpha's mate, it reflects well on our bloodline if you're visible. Useful. Don't disappear into the background the way you usually do. He stood. He moved away. He didn't look back. I stared at the wooden grain of the table in front of me. Visible, I thought. Useful. As though those were the two categories available to me, and I had so far failed at both. You looked like you wanted to run. The voice came from my left. I turned to find a girl settling onto the bench beside me, young, dark-haired, with clever eyes and the kind of easy confidence that comes from spending time around pack warriors. Mira. My closest friend, and the only person in this pack who had ever used the word friend about me and meant it precisely. I didn't want to run, I said. Your hand was on that tree like it was holding you in place. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Don't, she said gently. I saw what happened during the binding, Seren. My whole body went very still. I don't know what you think you saw. He looked at you. She said it simply. Without drama. Right in the middle of the ceremony. He looked at you. It was a glance. People glance at things. Mira was quiet for a moment. Then, alphas don't glance during binding ceremonies. Every movement is deliberate. Every word. Every breath. She paused. That wasn't a glance. I stared at the mead in front of me. The torchlight made it look like liquid amber. Like something precious. It doesn't matter what it was, I said. The ceremony is complete. He's bound to Lyra. Mira said nothing for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and careful. The binding thread can be tied, Seren. That doesn't always mean it holds. I looked at her sharply. She looked back. And in the silence between us, something unsaid and enormous breathed quietly. Across the hall, on the elevated dais, I saw Caelum Drevon lift a cup of mead in answer to a warrior's toast. His jaw was sharp in the firelight. His expression was controlled. His eyes swept the room with the automatic, measuring attention of someone who never fully switches off. And then, just for a moment, his gaze moved to the far left table. To me. He looked away immediately. Quicker than before. But his hand, I noticed, had tightened around the cup. Just slightly. Just enough. What are you doing? I thought, though I wasn't certain whether I was speaking to him or to myself. The fire crackled. The pack celebrated around me. And somewhere above the thatched roof of the hall, the moon began her slow, deliberate arc across the sky. She had a plan. She had always had a plan. The question, the one that would hollow out the next weeks of my life, was whether anyone involved would survive it. Chapter 2. He didn't sleep the first night. Caelum Drevon lay in the dark of his chamber, the Alpha's chamber, stone-walled and high-ceilinged, with a single narrow window that admitted a blade of moonlight, and he stared at the ceiling and he refused. He was very good at refusing. He had refused grief when his father died. Refused fear before every battle he had fought and won. Refused the slow rot of doubt when his advisors told him he was making a mistake, binding himself to a pack for political alliance instead of waiting for the moon's true call. A true alpha secures his borders, he had told himself. A true alpha doesn't wait for poetry. He had believed that. He had been so certain. He closed his eyes at some point past the second bell. He didn't mean to sleep. He slept. And she was there. Not Lyra. Not the golden woman he had just bound himself to in front of 2 packs and every elder within a day's ride. Her. The girl at the edge of the clearing. The one who had stood apart from the celebration like she was afraid that participating too fully might cost her something. He hadn't meant to look at her during the ceremony. His gaze had simply moved. Without his permission. Without any reason he could name. And now, in the dream, he was looking at her again. She was standing in a forest he didn't recognize, older than the one that bordered the pack territory, darker, the trees massive and ancient and breathing with a kind of awareness that forests in waking life didn't have. She wasn't wearing the modest brown dress she'd worn at the ceremony. She wore something the color of deep water. A garment that moved with her like it was part of her, like it was woven from shadow and the space between stars. And her eyes, the ones he'd caught for barely a moment across the clearing tonight, were looking directly at him. Not away. At him. With an expression he couldn't categorize, because no one had ever looked at him quite like that. Not with fear. Not with want. With recognition. Like she was looking at something she had always known existed but had never expected to actually find. "You made a mistake," she said. Her voice was quiet. Even in the dream, it was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills up space rather than empties it. "The binding is done," he said. "That's not what I said." She tilted her head. "I said you made a mistake." "I know what you said." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "She doesn't smell like home to you." He felt it, a shudder that started somewhere in his chest and moved outward through his arms, his hands, his jaw. "What do you know about that?" "Nothing," she said. "And everything." She turned. She began to walk into the darker part of the forest. He took a step toward her, then stopped. "What is your name?" he called after her. She didn't answer. But she paused, just for a moment, and glanced back over her shoulder. And then the dream dissolved into white, and he was awake, and the moonlight blade through his window had moved 3 full inches across the stone floor. He sat up. His heart was working harder than it should have been for a man who had simply been sleeping. He pressed both hands flat on the furs covering the bed and breathed, slow and deliberate, the way he'd trained himself to breathe in difficult moments. He smelled the chamber. Smoke. Stone. The cold mineral smell of mountain air through the window. And beneath all of that, very faint, already fading, something else. Something that smelled like rain on warm earth. Dark wildflowers. A hearth that has burned long and low and still holds heat in the stone. Home, something deep in his chest said. That smells like. He stood up so fast the furs slid to the floor. He walked to the window. Pressed his forehead to the cold stone frame. Below him, the pack settlement was dark and still. Torches down to guttering stumps. Everyone asleep. He scanned the paths between the structures automatically, alpha instinct, always watching, always mapping. And then his gaze stopped. At the edge of the path that led from the hall toward the outer cottages, the one that passed beneath the ancient oak that had served as the pack's boundary marker for longer than anyone alive could remember. A figure. Small. Cloaked in dark fabric. Moving with the quiet, careful step of someone who was very practiced at not being heard. She paused beneath the oak. Looked up. For just a moment, and he could not have explained, later, why he was certain she was looking at his window specifically. She was perfectly, completely still. Then she walked on. Into the dark. Gone. Caelum stood at the window for a long time after. His hand was pressed to the center of his chest. He was trying to identify what he was feeling. He couldn't. Not precisely. But it was enormous. And it was entirely, unacceptably, focused on the wrong sister. In the morning, he came to the hall for the first meal with his jaw set and his shoulders straight and his expression locked into the particular blankness that his warriors recognized as a signal to keep their distance. Lyra sat beside him. She was warm and easy in the way she always was, touching his arm lightly to get his attention, laughing with the right amount of brightness when the elder made a joke, saying exactly the right things at exactly the right moments. She was very good at this. Caelum 8. He gave correct answers when spoken to. He performed the role with the efficiency of long practice. And he did not look at the far end of the left table. He did not look. He was very deliberate about not looking. Which was, he was aware, its own kind of looking. The new Alpha's mate is exceptional. The voice belonged to Commander Voss, his second, his oldest friend, the one person who had always been allowed to say true things to him. They were standing outside, in the walled yard behind the hall, going through the motions of a weapons review they'd delayed twice already. She is, Caelum said. Voss nodded slowly. He was examining the edge of a blade he'd sharpened 3 times already this morning, which meant he was thinking rather than working. The pack seems settled, Voss continued. Alliance is secure. Your father's advisors would have approved. They would have. So. Voss set the blade down. Looked at him sideways, the particular look he'd been deploying since they were young, and it had meant I know something is wrong and I'm going to be very patient about waiting for you to admit it. Good night's sleep? Silence. Caelum. Don't. I'm not doing anything. You have a tone. I always have a tone. Voss picked the blade back up. You look like a man who didn't sleep. You look like a man who is spending a tremendous amount of energy not looking at something. And you've asked me 3 times this morning if the boundary patrols include the East Path. Caelum said nothing. The East Path, Voss said conversationally, is the one that runs under the old oak. Which is the one that leads to the outer cottages. Which is, I believe, where the... That is enough, Voss. Voss nodded pleasantly. Of course. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Voss, quietly, the moon doesn't make mistakes, Caelum. Don't. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. His voice came out lower than he intended. Harder. And it doesn't change anything. The binding is done. The alliance is secured. Whatever the moon, he stopped. Pressed his back teeth together. It changes nothing. Voss looked at him for a long moment. If you say so, he said. He picked up the next blade. He said nothing else. But his expression said everything his mouth had agreed to leave alone. Caelum returned to the hall at midday. He was careful. He was controlled. He took his seat beside Lyra and he responded to everything she said, and he did not search the room. For 4 full minutes, he did not search the room. And then, as if something in him had been counting down and had simply run out of patience, his gaze moved. Left. To the far end of the table. She was there. Sitting with her dark-haired friend, her head bent over something she was reading, a thin roll of parchment, creased from being unrolled many times. Her lips moved slightly, the way they do when someone reads something they care about. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow. He hadn't noticed that during the ceremony. She was wearing gray today. Simple fabric, no adornment. The exact kind of clothing designed to help someone disappear. She was not disappearing. Not to him. He looked away. He took a slow breath. He identified what he was feeling, and it was this. Something has already begun. Something I did not choose and cannot stop and have no idea what to do with. And beneath that, quieter and more dangerous. She said I made a mistake. She was right. She was absolutely right. Chapter 3. I had developed a talent, over the years, for pretending I hadn't noticed things. It was a survival skill, mostly. When you are the quieter sister. The easier to overlook one. The one who learned young that opinions offered without invitation tend to make powerful people uncomfortable, you learn to notice everything and speak of nothing. I noticed things. I noticed for instance, that the alpha had not looked at Lyra the way the binding stories say an alpha looks at his chosen mate. I had heard the stories all my life. We all had. The way an alpha recognizes the moon's call, the particular stillness that comes over a wolf when they find the person the moon made for them. Like a key turning in a lock. Like a sound that was always playing just below hearing suddenly becoming clear. He had looked at Lyra the way you look at a perfect map of a territory you intend to conquer. Precise. Strategic. Certain. Not wrong. But not that. I noticed. I said nothing. 3 days after the binding ceremony, my sister found me in the small room I kept behind the hall's herb stores, my room, as I thought of it, though it had no official claim to that title. Just a habit of solitude I'd cultivated and a space small enough that no one thought it worth visiting. I was sorting dried herbs when she came in. Lyra. Golden. Smiling. Wearing her new status the way she wore everything, as though it had been sewn directly onto her, perfectly fitted. Seren. She sat on the edge of the low shelf without asking, because Lyra never needed to ask. Not unkindly, just comfortably. The ease of someone who has never been made to feel unwelcome. Why do you keep hiding in here? I'm not hiding. I'm working. You're always working when you're hiding. She tilted her head. Come to the main hall tonight. Father wants us both visible. And she paused, and something shifted in her expression. Something more careful. Caelum's advisors are meeting with the Elder Council. It would be good for our family if I look useful, I said. The words came out flatter than I intended. Lyra blinked. I was going to say if our family looks unified. I looked at her. She looked back. And I saw it, the particular blink that meant she had heard something in my voice she wasn't sure how to respond to. Not because she was cruel. Because she genuinely, completely, did not understand what it felt like to be managed. It wasn't her fault. It still hurt. I'll be there, I said. She brightened immediately. Good. Wear the blue garment. The one with the silver thread. She stood. She smiled. She paused in the doorway. You know, you should let people see you more, Seren. Said lightly, affectionately. The way you say something to someone you love and have absolutely no idea you're wounding. You're not as invisible as you think. She left. I stared at the dried herbs in my hands for a long time. Not as invisible as you think. If only she knew. If only she knew that the alpha had looked at me, twice, in the space of 3 days. If only she knew that when I'd walked back from the hall 3 nights ago, past the old oak, and looked up at the stone building where the alpha's chamber window threw a blade of cold light. He had been standing there. Looking down. Directly at me. I had kept walking. But my heart had not recovered properly since. I wore the gray dress that evening. Not the blue with silver thread. I chose the gray deliberately, the way you choose armor, not for beauty but for protection. The great hall was full and warm. Torches high, voices loud, the smell of spiced mead and roasted venison cutting through the cold evening air. I found my place at the edge of things, because that is where I have always operated best. Mira found me within minutes. Gray, she said, sitting down. It was clean. The blue was clean too. I helped you wash it 3 days ago. I said nothing. She studied me with those clever eyes of hers. You've been thinking very hard about something for 3 days and you haven't told me yet, which means it's either something you haven't admitted to yourself or something you don't want to say out loud. Both, I said. She nodded, like that was the answer she'd expected. He looked at you again today. I kept my face still. Who? Seren. Mira. He looked at you at midday in the hall. Not a glance. A look. Long enough that Voss, the big second commander, noticed and then very carefully stopped looking at what the Alpha was looking at. I pressed my thumb into the grain of the table. It doesn't mean anything, I said. You don't believe that. I need to believe it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, very carefully, what do you feel? When you're near him? I thought about lying. I considered several comfortable options. Then I exhaled. Like something is pulling, I said. Quietly. Like a confession made to floorboards. Here. I pressed my hand to my sternum, the same place I'd pressed it at the ceremony. Like something recognizes him. Something deeper than thought. And it's been getting stronger, not weaker, and I don't know how to make it stop. Mira was very still. Seren, she said carefully. That's what the old texts describe. The bond recognition. When the moon. Don't. My voice cracked slightly at the edges. Don't say it. Because if you say it, it becomes a real thing. And if it's a real thing, then. I stopped. We both knew how that sentence ended. If it was real, then the moon had made a catastrophic mistake. Or the moon had made no mistake at all, which was somehow worse. I looked up. Across the hall. Across the noise and the firelight and the distance I had carefully constructed. He was already looking. He looked away the moment our eyes met, deliberately, immediately, like a man pulling his hand back from a flame. But the color had changed in his jaw. A muscle there, tight and held. And his hand, wrapped around the mead cup. The same grip I had noticed at the ceremony. Too tight. Like something was working against his control. I stood up. Where are you going? Mira asked. To get air, I said. I moved through the hall. Kept my eyes ahead. Navigated the press of bodies with the ease of long practice, making myself small, making myself unnoticeable. I reached the side door. I pushed through it. The night air came at me cold and immediate, a relief, like sinking into cold water after a fever. I pressed my back against the outer wall and breathed. The moon was high and almost full. 3 more days to full moon. I closed my eyes. Stop feeling this, I told myself. He is your sister's mate. The binding is done. Whatever this is, it isn't allowed. It isn't possible. It doesn't matter. You came outside. My eyes snapped open. He was standing 6 feet away. I hadn't heard him follow me. I hadn't heard anything. The man moved like nothing I had a comparison for. Like weight that had learned to be silent. Caelum Drevon. Standing in the dark outside the hall. Looking at me with that expression I still didn't have a name for. I straightened. I made my voice completely level. Alpha. A short nod. Correct. Respectful. Everything my training required. A pause. You know, he said, and his voice was different out here. Lower. Like the hall had been holding something back. I have asked Voss 3 times today to tell me the name of Lyra's sister. My heart did something complicated. And what did he tell you? I said. He told me to ask you myself. I stared at him. He stared back. Seren, I said. My name is Seren. Something moved across his face. Seren, he repeated. Just that. Just my name. In his voice. In the dark. Like he was testing the weight of it. Like he was learning how it fit. I told myself to say something polite. Something appropriate. Something that would end this conversation and return us both safely to the world where he was my sister's mate and I was the background of every room I entered. Instead, what came out was. You looked at me during the ceremony. Silence. He didn't deny it. That was the thing that undid me. He simply looked at me, in the dark, in the moonlight, and did not deny it. I did, he said. Why? A long pause. A pause so long I heard 3 separate sounds from inside the hall: laughter, a cup set down, the creak of a bench. I don't have an answer, he said, that I'm prepared to say out loud. And the ground beneath me shifted. Not metaphorically. Something deep, in the place I had pressed my hand 3 times in 3 days, shifted, like 2 plates of stone grinding against each other, like a recognition so large it was moving earth. I stepped back. "Good night, Alpha," I said. My voice was steady. Everything else was not. I turned. I walked. I made it to the path that led to the outer cottages before my legs started shaking. Behind me, he said nothing. He didn't follow. But I knew, the way you know the thing you can least afford to know, that he watched until I disappeared into the dark. And somewhere above us, rounding toward fullness, the moon burned on. Saying nothing. Having said, already, everything. Chapter 4. Sleep did not come easily in the outer cottages. The walls were thin there. Old timber and packed clay, the kind that let in cold and sound in equal measure, whined through the gaps, the distant call of night birds, the low, rhythmic pulse of the forest that never entirely went quiet. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling and listened to all of it. And beneath all of it, beneath wind and forest and the distant murmur of the pack settling into night, I heard my own heartbeat. It was wrong. Not fast. Not panicked. Something different from that. Syncopated. Like it was trying to find a rhythm it had been separated from. Like a drum listening for another drum across a very great distance. I pressed my hand to my chest for the 4th time in as many days. Stop it, I told myself. My chest did not listen. I rose before dawn. Not because I had slept and woken, because I had never truly slept. Just moved in and out of something restless and shapeless that didn't deserve the name. I dressed in the dark. Gray dress. Soft boots. The old cloak I'd had since I was 16, deep green, worn at the hem, with a hood large enough to pull low if I needed the extra invisibility. I needed it this morning. I took the east path. I told myself I was going to the forest's edge to check the herb beds I maintained there. The autumn stoneweed was close to harvest. The munbract needed thinning before the cold set in properly. These were real tasks, practical tasks, the kind of tasks that had nothing at all to do with the fact that the east path ran beneath the old oak. The old oak that stood directly beneath the Alpha's chamber window. I was a very good liar. Even to myself. The oak was dark and enormous in the pre-dawn gray. I stopped beneath it the way I had 3 nights ago, pulled up short by some instinct I hadn't agreed to listen to, and looked up. The window was dark. Of course it was dark. It was before dawn. The Alpha of the Drevon bloodline did not stand at windows before dawn, staring down at the east path, hoping to. "You're early." I stopped breathing. The voice came from above me, not from the window, but from the oak itself. I looked up. He was sitting in the tree. Caelum Drevon. The Iron Wolf. The most feared Alpha in 3 territories. Sitting in an oak tree in the dark before dawn like an enormous, terrifying bird. He was looking down at me with an expression that might, on a less controlled face, have been sheepish. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "So you climbed a tree," I said. "I come up here to think." A pause. "I have since I was young." Old habit. I stared at him. He stared back down. Something about the absurdity of it, the sheer, impossible, almost gentle absurdity of finding the most powerful Alpha alive sitting in a tree in the dark, cracked something open in my chest. A sound came out of me. Small. Involuntary. Laughter. Real laughter, the unguarded kind, the kind that doesn't ask permission, and the moment it left me I pressed my hand over my mouth like I could take it back. But it was already in the air between us. and his expression had changed. The control, that seamless, impenetrable control he wore like a second skin, had cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile exactly. Something more careful than that. Like a man seeing something he didn't expect and wasn't sure he was allowed to want. "Come up," he said. "I'm not climbing a tree. You climb them all the time. I've seen the scratches on your hands from the bark." I looked at my hands. Then I looked up at him. "You've been watching my hands," I said. The almost smile deepened slightly. "Come up," he said again. I climbed the tree. I was not graceful about it, I was practical, which is a different thing, and I found the wide branch 2 levels below his without looking to see if he was watching me. He was watching me. I settled onto the branch with my back against the trunk and my feet dangling, and I looked out at the pre-dawn world spreading below us, the pack settlement still sleeping, the rooftops gray, the forest beyond the boundary like a dark, breathing wall. He shifted on his branch. Not closer. Just reorienting. The silence between us was different from the silence in the hall last night. That silence had been taut with everything unsaid. This one was broader. Like the dark gave things room to breathe. "You come up here to think," I said. "Yes." "What do you think about?" A pause. Usually strategy. Pack movement. What the next season requires. Another pause, longer. Lately, other things. I did not ask what things. He did not volunteer it. We sat in the quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Because the dark makes confessions easier, I used to climb this tree when I was small." "I know. Your name is carved in the trunk on the east side. 3 feet up." I blinked. I had carved that when I was 8 years old. I had forgotten. "You noticed that," I said. "I notice most things," he said. "It is a habit. Or a curse, depending. What does it feel like to you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Both," he said. "Mostly it feels like both." The sky was beginning to lighten at the far eastern edge. The deep black grading through to purple. The first suggestion of blue. We had maybe 20 minutes before the settlement began to wake. 20 minutes in a tree. And I thought, this is the strangest, most impossible thing that has ever happened to me. And also, I am not ready for it to be over. "Why did you choose the alliance?" I asked. He was quiet for long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer. "Because the border with the Ash Pack has been unstable for 6 years, he said. "Because your father's bloodline commands 3 mountain passes that control access to the northern range. Because an alpha who waits for poetry while his borders bleed is not an alpha worth following." "Those are good reasons," I said. "Yes. Are they enough?" Longer silence. The sky kept lightening. "I don't know," he said. And the honesty of it, the simple, unguarded honesty of it, from a man who struck me as someone who had not been uncertain about anything in years, landed in my chest like a stone dropped in still water. Rings spreading outward. Touching everything. "Seren." My name in his voice again. Different from last night. Quieter. "What is that thing you pressed against the other night, when you walked back from the ceremony?" "You put your hand here," I said, without thinking, and pressed my palm to my sternum. He went very still above me. "Yes," he said. "There." I looked up at him. He looked down at me. "Do you feel it?" he asked. And I could have lied. I was so practiced at lying to myself about this that the lie was already assembled, ready to deploy. Instead I heard myself say, "Every time you're near." The branch creaked softly as he shifted. The sky was pink now along the horizon. "This cannot be simple," he said. Voice low. Rough at the edges in a way it hadn't been. "No," I agreed. "It cannot." Your sister. I know. The binding. I know. Then you understand why. I know, I said for the third time. We looked at each other in the growing dawn. Two people on separate branches of an old oak tree. Two people with a problem neither of them had chosen and neither of them could name without it becoming something they couldn't put back. You should go, he said. Before the pack wakes. Yes, I said. Neither of us moved. For 3 full breaths, either of us moved. Then I swung my legs forward and climbed down, careful, practical, the same way I'd gone up. When my feet found the ground, I looked up one more time. He was watching. Caelum, I said. His name. For the first time. Something happened to his face when I said it, a shift so fast and so deep I almost missed it. Go, he said. His voice barely above a murmur. Please. I went. 2 days to full moon. I knew because I felt it, in the pull of something in my blood, in the way the morning light looked slightly more saturated than the day before, in the low, constant thrumming in my chest that had nothing to do with effort and everything to do with him. I spent the morning in the herb beds at the forest's edge. Working with my hands. Keeping my mind deliberately occupied with the small and the immediate, the texture of stoneweed root, the sharp green scent of fresh moonbract, the satisfying click of my small iron blade through a stem cut cleanly. It worked for approximately 1 hour. Then Mira arrived. She sat on the flat stone at the edge of the herb bed and watched me work with an expression that meant she already knew something. What? I said. Nothing. Mira. Voss saw you coming down from the old oak at dawn. I cut a stem. Then another. And? I said. And he came to find me specifically to mention it. A pause. Which means the alpha was up there too, and Voss wanted someone to know, and the person he chose to tell was you. I set down the blade. This is already beyond me, I said quietly. I don't know how to manage this. You can't manage this, Mira said, just as quietly. That's the thing about the bond. You don't manage it. It manages you. He's bound to my sister. I know. The thread is tied. I know. Then what am I supposed to do with? I gestured vaguely at my own chest. With this. Mira was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful and deliberate, the voice she used when she was saying something she had been turning over in her mind for a long time. There are old texts, she said. Older than the binding traditions. Older than the ceremony Elder Rowan performs. I looked at her. Texts that describe what happens when the moon's true call and a pack-made bond occupy the same space. She paused. When an alpha binds himself to someone who is not the moon's chosen. The herb bed was very quiet. Those texts, I said carefully. What do they say? Mira met my eyes. That the bond cannot be suppressed forever, she said. That the moon always corrects. The word corrects landed like a blade finding its mark. And the existing binding? I asked. Weakens, she said. In the absence of true resonance, it weakens. Like a fire fed the wrong kind of wood. I stared at the herbs in my hands. A long time passed. Then, does Lyra know any of this? Myra's expression shifted into something softer. Sadder. No, she said. I closed my eyes. And there it was, the complication that made everything else feel simple. Because it wasn't just the alpha and me and the moon and the impossible pull between us. It was my sister. My golden, uncomplicated, entirely innocent sister who had done nothing wrong in her life except be born beautiful and chosen and perfectly unaware of what she didn't know. Who was going to be hurt? Regardless of what happened next. Regardless of whether I did everything right. She was going to be hurt. And I didn't know yet if that was something I was capable of surviving. That evening, I sat with Lyra at the long table. She talked with her usual ease, the new friendships she was forming among the Alpha's inner circle, the changes she was planning for the pack hall's winter arrangements, the way Caelum had complimented the herb preparation I had sent to the kitchens that morning. He asked who made it, she said brightly. I told him my sister has always been extraordinary with herbs. He nodded very seriously, the way he does everything. She laughed softly. I smiled. It was not a real smile. But it was the best I had available. And across the hall, because I felt his gaze the way you feel a change in temperature, he was not looking at us. He was looking at his cup. His jaw was tight. His hand too tight around the cup. One day to full moon, I thought. Something is coming. Something is coming and I don't have the words for it yet and I cannot stop it any more than I can stop the moon from rising. What happens when the moon rises full and the bond she chose is not the bond that was made? I was about to find out. Chapter 5. The day of the full moon arrived like a held breath finally released. The air changed first. Every wolf in the settlement felt it, that particular, electric shift in the atmosphere that preceded the full moon's rise, the slow building of something ancient and enormous that lived in the blood rather than the mind. The pack moved differently on full moon days. More carefully. More aware of each other. Instincts closer to the surface. Emotions less contained. The thin membrane between what you felt and what you showed growing translucent with the rising pressure of the moon's pull. I was not immune to it. I was, in fact, managing it worse than I ever had before. By mid-morning, the pull in my chest had become something I could no longer pretend was subtle. It was a pressure. Constant and directional, like a lodestone being dragged toward north, like something in me had a very clear idea of where it was supposed to be and was becoming increasingly impatient with the distance. I ground herbs. I organized the stores. I reorganized the stores. I climbed to the highest point of the outer cottage roof to check the thatch repairs and stood there in the cold morning air with the settlement spread below me, and looked, without meaning to, directly at the great hall. At the window of the Alpha's working chamber, which faced east. He was at the window. He was looking up. I climbed down immediately. My heart was doing the thing that wasn't quite a heartbeat, the syncopated searching thing that had been keeping me awake. This is a problem, I thought with magnificent understatement. This is a very large problem that is going to become significantly larger before tonight is over. The full moon ceremonies began at sundown. Every pack marked it differently, some with hunts, some with ritual, some with the great communal shift that allowed the wolf self freedom after weeks of restraint. The Drevon pack, I learned, did it with fire. A massive bonfire in the central clearing, the same clearing where the binding ceremony had taken place, lit while the sun was still setting, so that the transition from day to night was marked by the moment the firelight became brighter than the dying sun. The pack gathered in a wide circle. Children at the outer ring, warriors toward the center, the Alpha and his inner circle closest to the flame. I found my place at the outer ring. Mira was beside me. She hadn't said much today. She had stayed near, which was its own kind of language. The fire was enormous, taller than two men, its light turning everything gold and deep shadow by turns. The heat reached me even at the outer ring, the pressure of it against my face like a second presence. And then the moon rose. It came up over the eastern tree line like something that had been waiting, full and enormous and so bright it seemed to push the stars back from around it, claiming space, claiming sky. The pack felt it simultaneously. I heard it, the collective shift of breath, the low sound that moved through the circle like a wave, the deep, involuntary response of every wolf body in the clearing to the thing that lived in their blood and answered only to that light. I felt it too. Not the pack's response to the moon. Something more specific. More directed. Like a compass needle swinging hard to true north and locking in place. The pressure in my chest stopped being pressure and became something else. Pull. Hard and clear and absolutely certain. Pointing directly. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I knew he was across the fire from me before I looked, the way you know a storm is coming before you see the clouds. I kept my eyes on the flames. Don't look, I told myself. Don't look, don't look, don't. I looked. He was standing at the inner ring across the bonfire, beside Lyra, with his hands at his sides and his jaw set and his eyes. His eyes were already on me. Full moon firelight between us. My sister at his side. His gaze had the quality of something that had given up pretending. The control, the seamless, practiced control I had watched him wear for days, had been eroded. Not gone. But thin. Like ice at the edge of a thaw. Lyra turned to say something to him. He turned to answer her. And I watched his face change, watched him do it, deliberately, with visible effort, the way a man steps away from a ledge he doesn't want to leave. Seren, Mira said softly. I know, I said. You need to. I know. But I stood there for 3 more seconds. 3 seconds where neither the fire nor my sister nor every binding tradition this pack held sacred was enough to make me feel the pull less. 3 seconds where the full moon poured down on both of us like it was completing a circuit. Then I turned. I walked out of the circle, through the outer ring, and into the dark forest path beyond. The trees were silver in shadow in the moonlight. The bonfire sound faded behind me, voices, the distant note of a horn, the crackle of the flame, and what replaced it was the deep, alive quiet of the forest. I walked without direction. Or rather, I told myself I was walking without direction, even as my feet took the path toward the old boundary stone at the forest's edge. The massive granite marker, half swallowed by roots, that had been the Drevon pack's eastern limit since before anyone alive had been born. I reached it. I put my hand on it. The stone was cold and very solid and very real. I pressed my forehead to it. Breathed. This is not happening to you, I told myself. Nothing has happened. He looked at you. You talked in a tree. He said something with an honest voice in the dark. None of that means? You left the circle. I didn't move. So did you, I said. His footsteps on the path behind me. I hadn't heard them, I never heard him until he was already there. I told Voss I was checking the eastern boundary. Old alpha habit. And are you checking it? A pause. No, he said. I straightened slowly. Turned around. He was closer than I expected. 5 feet. No more. In the moonlight, without the hall's firelight or the bonfire between us, he looked different. Less armored. The controlled expression was still there, but it was working harder than it had been, like a wall with too much weight against it. You shouldn't have followed me, I said. I know. Your maid is at the ceremony? I know, Seren. Then why? Because. He stopped. Pressed his jaw together. Looked at me with those dark, moon-washed eyes. Because the moment you left the circle, whatever has been pulling toward you for 6 days became something I could not remain in place against. And I have remained in place against things that would have broken most men. A pause, raw at the edges. This was not one of those things. The forest was very quiet. My heart was doing the terrible, recognizing thing. You dream about me, I said. It came out before I could stop it. He went very still. I heard you talking to Voss, I said quickly. I didn't mean to overhear. You said she doesn't smell like home and I. How much did you hear? Enough. Silence. Long, enormous silence. Then, yes, he said. I dream about you. Rough. Reluctant. Like a confession made under duress. Every night since the ceremony. And before you ask, no. I do not understand it. I do not accept it. And I have no idea what to do with it. I stared at him. What do you dream? I asked. That you're real, he said. More real than, he stopped. More real than anything I have chosen. The words hit the quiet forest and did not echo. They simply stayed. Present. Immovable. Caelum. My voice barely above a whisper. Don't. His voice rough. Don't say my name like that. Like what? Like it means something. It does mean something, I said. That's the problem. He took one step forward. One step, and the 5 feet became 3. Close enough now that I could detect it, that storm and iron scent, the cold mountain depth of it, and beneath it something that my blood knew before my mind caught up. Familiar. Right. Like a scent I had known in another life and had been searching for without knowing I was searching. Something in me made a sound that didn't reach my throat. He felt it too. I saw it in the way his chest moved, a sharp, involuntary breath, like a man stepping into cold water. Seren, he said. Just my name. Broken into its 2 syllables like he needed the space between them to think. I know, I said. The binding. I know. Your sister. I know. My voice cracked on it this time. I turned away. Put my hand back on the cold stone. Grounded myself. I know all of it. I know it every second. It doesn't make this smaller, he said. No, I whispered. It doesn't make it smaller. The forest breathed around us. Somewhere beyond the trees, the bonfire was still burning. The pack was still celebrating. My sister was somewhere in the firelight, waiting for the man who had followed his feet into the dark without permission. I will not betray your sister, I said. Clear. Final. I know, he said. And I will not be something you keep in shadows. I know. Firmer now. Almost desperate. Seren, do you think I want this? What do you want? Silence. The longest silence yet. And then, quietly, honestly, with the voice of a man who had run out of walls to stand behind. Something I have no right to want. The moon poured down through the canopy above us. Neither of us moved. And I thought, this is the moment. This exact moment, 2 people standing in a forest in the moonlight with every reason in the world between them. This is where it either stops or it doesn't. Go back to the ceremony, I said. He didn't move immediately. 3 breaths. Then, yes. He turned. He walked 2 steps. He stopped. Seren. Not looking at me. Voice aimed at the dark path ahead. What the moon builds, it doesn't unbuild. Whatever this is. A pause. I need you to know that I know that. And then he walked away. Into the dark. Back toward the fire. Back toward his life. I stood at the boundary stone with both hands pressed against it and my forehead dropping forward and my entire body shaking with the effort of something I couldn't name. The full moon blazed above me. Witness to everything. Silent and absolutely certain. I stayed at the stone until the shaking stopped. It took longer than it should have. When I finally walked back toward the settlement, I took the long path, the one that circled the herb gardens and the outer cottages, the one that added 20 minutes but avoided the clearing. I did not go back to the ceremony. I went to my small room behind the herb stores and I sat on the edge of my low bed and I thought about everything I had just been told without being told. What the moon builds, it doesn't unbuild. I pressed my palm flat to my chest. The pull was still there. It was always there. But something had changed tonight, something fundamental and irrevocable. He knew it. I knew it. We had both looked at it directly, in the full moon's light, with nothing between us but truth. And now we had to decide what to do with the knowledge. My sister came to my room an hour after midnight. She was flushed from the celebration, eyes bright, a strand of gold hair loose from its braid. You disappeared, she said, sitting on the shelf's edge the way she always did. I wasn't feeling well, I said. She looked at me for a moment, and something crossed her face, something more careful than her usual ease. A flicker. Like she had almost seen something and then decided not to look directly at it. Caelum disappeared for a while too, she said. Light. Casual. Like a question with no question mark. My hands were in my lap. Completely still. Did he? I said. He said he checked the eastern boundary. Old alpha habit. She smiled easily. He's very serious about his habits. She looked at me. I looked back. And the thing between us, the thing neither of us was saying, sat in the room and breathed. Seren, she said softly. Lyra. A pause. You would tell me, she said. If there was something I needed to know. My heart cracked cleanly down the middle. Yes, I said. And I had never told a lie that cost me more. She smiled, warm, trusting, entirely without suspicion. Good, she said. Then I'll sleep well tonight. She stood. She paused at the door. You look pale, she said. Come to breakfast in the morning. Let me see your face. She left. I sat in the dark long after her footsteps faded. The moon was still up. Still full. Still blazing through the small high window of my room with absolutely zero mercy. Something was coming. I could feel it the way I could feel a storm gathering, in my teeth, in my blood, in the deep place where instinct lived before language arrived. Something was coming. And no matter how carefully I moved or how small I made myself, I was directly in its path. Chapter 6. The morning after the full moon, the Alpha announced a war council. Not for war, not yet. But the word moved through the pack like the scent of smoke before fire, council. Which meant the commanders were being called in. Which meant the border situation Caelum had mentioned in the oak tree, the ash pack instability, the mountain passes, the 6 years of tension, had moved from background threat to foreground urgency. I learned this from Mira at dawn. 3 scouts came in during the night, she said, handing me a cup of something hot from the kitchen fire. From the northern ridge. Word is the ash pack made a move on the second mountain pass. I wrapped both hands around the cup. Aggressive move or probing? Mira looked at me sideways. You know the difference? My father kept maps. I read them. Probing, she said. For warriors. No contact with our sentries. But they crossed the boundary line, which means it was deliberate. I thought about this. He'll respond, I said. Of course he'll respond. Not with force. Not immediately. Not Caelum, he'll respond with counter-demonstration. Strategic repositioning to show strength without committing to engagement. Mira was quiet for a moment. You've been paying attention to him, she said. I drank from the cup. I pay attention to everything, I said. The council meeting was held in the great hall with the long tables cleared to the walls and a large territory map unrolled across the central floor, weighted at the corners with river stones, the ink lines faded but legible, the mountain range drawn in the old style with small peaked marks like teeth. I was not invited to the council. I was not expected to attend. I attended anyway. Not inside, that would have been noticed, and noticed badly. But the hall's north-facing wall had a storage alcove along the outer corridor, and the wall between the alcove and the hall was old timber that had shrunk in the winter cold and left gaps. I had discovered this 3 days ago. I told myself it was general curiosity. I sat on a low crate in the alcove and listened. Caelum's voice was different in command. Still low. But the quiet that fills space quality of it hardened into something more, cleaner, more direct, with the particular economy of a man who has given enough orders to know that extra words are wasted weight. For warriors, no contact, this is a message, not a strike, he said. They want us to know they're testing the pass. They want us to react visibly so they can measure our response time. Then we don't respond? Someone I didn't recognize, older voice, slightly rough. One of the commanders. We respond. We reposition the Northridge Patrol from 6 to 12. We let them see us see them. A pause. But we don't cross our own boundary. We don't give them a justification. And if they push again? They will push again, Caelum said flatly. The question is what they're looking for when they do. This is about the alliance. The new mating bond, Voss's voice, steady, measured. They're testing whether our alliance with the Aldrich bloodline is genuinely secure or whether it's still ceremonial, Caelum said. The word landed without softness. We need to demonstrate integration, he continued. Not just the binding. Demonstrated integration, joint patrol, shared defense, the Aldrich bloodline visibly operating as part of this pack structure. I heard the map being touched, the soft sound of a hand moving across it. That means your mate's family needs to be visible, Voss said carefully. Positioned in roles that the Ash Pack scouts can observe and report back. Agreed, Caelum said. The mate herself, positioning her at the pack border ceremony next week makes sense. But the sister is? I stopped breathing. The sister manages the herb stores and the pack's medicinal supply, Voss continued. That's not insignificant. If she were more visibly integrated into the pack's operational structure. That's not the role I'm assigning her, Caelum said. Fast. Too fast. A beat of silence. Understood, Voss said, and I could hear in those 2 syllables that he understood considerably more than the instruction. I sat back on the crate. My heart was not doing the searching syncopated thing. It was doing something steadier. Something that felt like clarity. He was protecting me. Not from the Ash Pack. From visibility. From being positioned in a role that would put me closer to him in the daily structure of pack operations, where it would be harder to maintain the careful distances we were both working to keep. He was protecting me. And himself. And Lyra. And everything that was currently balanced on an edge so fine that a single wrong step would send it all down. The council lasted until midday. I slipped out of the alcove before the hall began to clear, took the long way around to the herb garden, and arrived at my bench looking like someone who had been there for several hours with no particular thought in her head. The stoneweed, I told myself. Focus on the stoneweed. I was 20 minutes into a focused and entirely unconvincing session of herb work when a shadow fell across the bench. Not Mira. Not Lyra. The shadow was too large. Too still. I looked up slowly. The woman was tall, nearly as tall as a warrior, built with the particular density of someone who had trained hard for years. Dark hair pulled back with bone pins. Eyes that were the particular shade of amber that comes with strong wolf bloodlines. A scar that ran from the left side of her jaw down to her collarbone like a history she'd decided not to hide. I had not seen her before. Which meant she had arrived with the scouts, or she was part of the Alpha's mobile retinue that rotated through. She looked at me with an expression that was very pleasant on the surface and very much the opposite underneath. You're Seren, she said. Yes, I said. The mate's sister. Yes. She smiled. It was a beautiful smile. Practiced. I'm Asha, she said. I'm one of the Alpha's senior scouts. Old friend. She said old friend with a particular weight on both words. I've been on the ridge for the past 3 months, she continued, sitting down on the bench across from mine without invitation. Just returned this morning. She looked me over with an expression that was curious and something else underneath. You're smaller than I expected. Smaller than what? I asked. Something flickered in those amber eyes. Then Voss described, she said. I set down my blade. Voss described me? I said. He mentioned you. In passing. She reached out and picked up a stem of moonbract from my basket, turned it in her fingers. Caelum and I have a long history. Did you know that? I don't know much about the Alpha's history, I said. No, I don't suppose you would. She set the stem back down. We trained together from the age of 12. Fought together in the eastern skirmishes. She paused, and the something underneath her smile rose closer to the surface. He is someone I know very well. I looked at her steadily. I understood what was happening. The question was why she had sought me specifically to have it happen. Why are you telling me this? I asked. The pleasant smile stayed in place. But her eyes measured me. Because I'm very observant, she said. And I notice things that other people choose not to notice. She stood. The Alpha made a good alliance. Your sister is a beautiful woman. And everything will be much simpler if the people involved understand their place within it. She looked at me for one more moment. Then she turned and walked back toward the main hall with the easy confidence of someone who has just made a point they were satisfied with. I sat in the herb garden and stared at the moonbract in my basket. My hands were perfectly steady. My mind was not. I found Mira before the evening meal. Told her everything in a low, fast voice behind the water barrels at the hall's east side. She listened without interrupting, a skill I valued in her above nearly everything else. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Seren, she said. You know her? I know of her. She was part of Caelum's pack before he became Alpha. Everyone assumed they would bond. She paused. She's never been selected. But she's never stopped expecting to be. I pressed my back against the barrel. She came to me, I said. Not Lyra. Me. I know, Mira said. Which means she noticed something. Yes. Which means others have noticed something. Seren. I need this to stop. My voice came out more raw than I intended. I need to find a way to whatever I feel, whatever he feels, it needs to stop being something that other people can see. Because if Seren can see it after one morning back in the settlement, then Lyra? I could not finish that sentence. Neither could Mira. We stood behind the water barrels while the evening light turned gold and the pack began moving toward the hall and the smell of roasting meat drifted past us. What are you going to do? Mira asked. I thought about the oak tree. The boundary stone. The full moon light between us. What the moon builds, it doesn't unbuild. I'm going to talk to him, I said. Mira looked at me. You're going to tell him to stop, she said. Not a question. I'm going to tell both of us to stop, I said. Whatever this is, however real it is, it's going to destroy my sister's life. And I am not, my voice locked. I pushed through it. I am not going to be the reason she is hurt. I am not that person. Mira reached out and took my hand. Held it. Said nothing, because there was nothing to say. I was right. And I was also, in a way I could feel but not yet speak, absolutely breaking. I waited outside the hall's side door until the evening meal was well underway. Until I heard the voices settle into the comfort of food and drink and the lessening of the day's tension. Then I slipped inside. Found Voss near the doorway, deliberate, because Voss was the one I needed. I need 5 minutes, I said quietly. With the Alpha. Outside. The north yard. Voss looked at me. His expression gave away very little. That's not, he started. Please, I said. He studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Short. Careful. 5 minutes, he said. The north yard was used for weapons practice in the morning. Empty now, dark, lit only by the residual glow from the hall's high windows. I stood in the middle of it. I waited. He came through the side door 2 minutes later. Pulled it closed behind him. stood 6 feet away in the dark and looked at me with that expression, the one that had never stopped working against my ability to remain sensible. I made myself speak before the silence could do what silences between us tended to do. "I need you to hear me," I said. "I'm listening," he said. "What is happening between us?" "Seren." "Let me finish." I met his eyes. "What is happening between us is real. I believe that. I think you believe it too. I think the moon has done something that neither of us asked for and neither of us can entirely explain." A breath. "And none of that changes what I am going to say to you." He was very still. "My sister is innocent," I said. "She has done nothing wrong. She chose this, chose you, with everything she had. She is trying to build a life that she believes in." My voice held. "Barely. I will not be the thing that destroys that. Not for anything. Not even for something real." Silence. The hall light moved across his jaw. His hands, at his sides, perfectly still, I watched them. Not tight. Something worse than tight. Open. Fingers slightly apart. The posture of a man who has nothing left to grip. "And if the bond," he started. "Then the bond is a thing I carry," I said. Quietly. Without, I stopped. Started again. Without making it into something that hurts the people around us. He looked at me for a long time. Long enough that I heard 3 separate sounds from inside the hall, a laugh, a cup, a bench. "You're asking me to pretend," he said. "I'm asking you to choose," I said. "The same way I am." More silence. "Then, you deserve." "Don't," I said. "Please don't tell me what I deserve. I know what I deserve. That's not what this is about." He exhaled. Long, controlled. The breath of a man standing very still in the middle of something enormous. "All right," he said. "All right? I will do what you're asking." His jaw set. "For your sister. For the pack. He stopped. Something crossed his face that I would spend a long time afterward trying not to think about. "I will try." "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded once. He turned to go back inside. He stopped. Didn't look back. "Seren." "Yes. I know that cost you something." I didn't answer. "I know," he said again. And went inside. I stood in the dark north yard alone for a long time. The moon was past full now, one day past, but still enormous. Still present. Still watching with that infuriating, patient, absolute certainty. "I know what you're doing," I thought at it. "And it's cruel." The moon said nothing. It never did. It simply waited. It was, apparently, very good at that. Chapter 7. Staying away from someone you are pulled toward is not a passive thing. People think it is. They think distance is simply the absence of closeness, that you stop moving towards something and the distance maintains itself. It doesn't. Distance, when it fights against something as fundamental as what the moon builds, is active work. It is a choice made not once but continuously, every morning when you wake and feel the pull orient itself like a compass finding north. Every meal in the hall where instinct tells you exactly where he is in the room before your eyes confirm it. Every moment his voice carries from somewhere nearby and something in your chest responds before your mind can intervene. Every single one of those moments is a choice. I made them. All of them. For 7 days after the North Yard conversation, I made every single one. The first day was the hardest. Not because I didn't weaken. But because the act of choosing requires you to be fully awake to what you're choosing against, and being fully awake to it is its own particular kind of suffering. I reorganized my entire daily pattern. Morning herb work at the forest's edge, which kept me away from the hall until the first meal was done. Midday in the stores, which were quiet and required enough focus to give my mind something to grip. Evening meal, present, visible, useful, exactly as my father had asked, seated at the opposite end of the hall with Mira as my anchor, my eyes forward, my hands steady. I did not take the east path. I did not walk beneath the old oak. I was very good at it. I was also, beneath the performance of being very good at it, something closer to hollowed out. Like a tree that looks solid from the outside and has been quietly eaten through. Lyra noticed. Not what I was doing, not the mechanics of the careful avoidance. But the hollowness. The performance. The version of me that showed up at the morning table with all the right expressions in all the right places but something missing from the center of it. She noticed the way you notice a song being played slightly off-key, not consciously, not with identification, but with a low, persistent sense that something is wrong with the sound. On the third day, she brought me a bowl of honeyed porridge I hadn't asked for and set it in front of me without comment. On the fifth day, she sat beside me during the afternoon rest and put her head on my shoulder the way she had when we were children, without asking, without explaining, just the warm weight of her presence offered freely. I sat very still and let her. And I thought, this is why. This exact warmth. This exact uncomplicated love. This is why. Caelum, for his part, was doing what he'd agreed to do. I knew because I watched, carefully, peripherally, from the disciplined distance I had set myself, and what I saw was a man executing control the way he executed everything else. With precision and thoroughness and absolutely no visible seams. He sat with Lyra at meals. He answered her questions. He walked with her in the evenings through the settlement. He was present in all the ways a mate is present. He did not look at me. Not once. In 7 days, not once. And I knew this was correct. I knew it was what I had asked for. I knew it was the only sane and decent option available to either of us. I hated it with a completeness that startled me. You both look, Mira said carefully on the 6th evening, like two people who are trying very hard not to be in pain and being somewhat transparent about it. I'm fine, I said. He snapped at Voss twice today during the patrol briefing, she said. Voss said he hasn't done that in 3 years. People snap sometimes. Not Caelum. The man has the emotional regulation of a stone wall. She paused. Or he did. I ate my meal. Deliberately. Mira watched me for a moment and then, with the mercy that made her my closest friend, she let it go. On the 7th day, Seren began making her presence felt. I had been watching her since the herb garden. She was not subtle, or rather, she was subtle in the specific way of someone who knows they are being subtle and wants you to know it too. She positioned herself near the Alpha at council. She volunteered for assignments that kept her in the hall during the hours he worked. She laughed easily, loudly, in the way that carries, at things he said in the hearing of others. She was reminding him of what they had been. Of what she believed she still could be. And I watched it from my careful distance and told myself that this was none of my concern. I told myself this with decreasing success. On the 8th day, something happened that I had not planned for. I was at the forest's edge at dawn, alone with the herb beds, when the sound reached me, quiet but distinct, coming from the direction of the boundary stone. Voices. I recognized both of them before I moved. Asha. And Caelum. I should have walked the other direction. I walked toward the stone. Not close, I stopped 30 feet away, behind a birch stand that gave cover without requiring me to be dishonest about what I was doing. I was eavesdropping. I knew I was eavesdropping. I did it anyway. You've been avoiding something, Asha said. Her voice was easy and direct, the voice of someone comfortable enough with the person she's addressing to say true things. I've known you long enough. I've been managing a border situation, Caelum said. You manage border situations like you breathe. It doesn't hollow you out. A pause. This is different. Silence. Asha. Do you know what I think? She said. Not unkindly, but with precision. I think you made this alliance believing strategy was enough. And something inconvenient happened. A longer silence. The binding is made, Caelum said. Flat. Final. The binding is made, Asha agreed. That doesn't mean you're at peace with it. Peace isn't required. No, she said. But you're miserable, Caelum. You're doing everything right and you're miserable. And the woman you bound yourself to is lovely and good, and she is not the reason. Silence. Very long. Don't, he said. Low. Warning. I'm not doing anything, Asha said. I'm observing. I've been observing since I got back. A breath. She's not what I expected. I did not need to ask who she was. She's remarkable, Asha said, and there was something in her voice I hadn't anticipated, something that wasn't bitterness. Something more complicated than that. That quality she has, of seeing everything and saying nothing. Of carrying things without making them into displays. Another pause. I went to her to frighten her off. She didn't frighten. I pressed my back against the birch tree. I know, Caelum said. Very quietly. Does she know what she is to you? Nothing. Caelum. We've spoken, he said. She was clear. About what she would and wouldn't do. For her sister. Yes. A long pause. Asha's voice, when it came again, was quiet and without armor. She's protecting everyone but herself. I pressed my hand to my sternum. Don't, I told myself. Don't you make a sound. I know, Caelum said. And the way he said it, 2 words, stripped of everything but the weight of them, told me more about what he was carrying than anything he'd said to my face. I turned. I walked back through the birch trees with my hand still pressed to my chest. The herb beds could wait. Everything could wait. I needed a moment where no one could see my face. Chapter 8. On the 9th day, my father summoned me. This was not unusual. He summoned me periodically to check that I was performing the visible and useful role he'd assigned. But when I arrived at his chamber in the main hall, I found him not alone. Elder Rowan was there. The old man sat in the high-backed chair my father reserved for important guests, his silver-threaded robe draped precisely, his ancient hands folded over a roll of parchment in his lap. He looked at me when I came in with eyes that were older than everything in the room and twice as sharp. Sit, my father said. I sat. Elder Rowan has raised a matter of some importance, my father began, with the carefully controlled energy of a man who has just been told something he is trying to decide how to feel about. Regarding the binding. My hands in my lap. Perfectly still. It's not the binding itself, Elder Rowan said. His voice was ancient, the sound of roots under earth. The ceremony was correctly performed. The thread was tied. That is not in question. He looked at me steadily. What I want to discuss is what has been happening since. The room was very quiet. Clarify, my father said. I've been watching the Alpha for 9 days, Elder Rowan said. And I've been doing this work for 53 years. I know what a man looks like when the bond settles. When it takes hold properly, when the moon has confirmed what the ceremony made. He paused. And I know what a man looks like when it doesn't. My father's jaw tightened. What are you saying, Elder? I'm saying the Alpha is bound, Rowan said slowly. But not settled. He turned to me. And I am saying I'd like to hear from you, child. Because in 53 years, I have learned that the person in the room who says the least usually knows the most. My heart was doing the terrible recognizing thing. I don't know what you want me to say, I said. Start with what you feel, Rowan said. I feel. The door behind me opened. We all turned. Caelum stood in the doorway. He had clearly come for my father, had not known I would be here. The fractional pause when he saw me told me everything. Alpha, my father said, rising quickly. We were just. I can come back, Caelum said. Eyes moving from me to Rowan. Reading the room with that automatic precision. No, Rowan said. Simply. Firmly. Come in. Close the door. A beat. Caelum came in. He closed the door. He stood at the edge of the room, not seated, because this was clearly not a moment where he intended to make himself comfortable, and looked at the elder with the particular expression of a man who suspects he is about to hear something he has been successfully avoiding. I want to ask you both something, Rowan said. And I want honest answers. Not careful answers. Not managed answers. He looked between us. Honest ones. No one spoke. When you are near each other, Rowan said, what do you feel in the center of your chest? My father made a sound. I ignored him. I looked at Rowan. A pull, I said. Constant. Directional. Since when? The ceremony. Rowan nodded slowly. Turned to Caelum. Caelum said nothing for a moment. Then, the same. Since when? Before the ceremony, he said. The room went very still. My father, what does that? It means, Rowan said, with the steady patience of someone delivering old knowledge to a room that isn't ready for it, that the moon's call was already present before the binding was made. He set the parchment on his knee. A bond of status and strategy was placed over a bond of soul. Like a stone placed over a spring. He paused. The water still moves. It simply has nowhere to go. My father's face had gone through several colors. The binding is valid, he said. Yes, Rowan said. Then nothing changes. That depends, Rowan said, on whether you mean legally or whether you mean in practice. He looked at my father steadily. Because nature does not recognize ceremony when it contradicts call. And the Alpha's disquiet will affect this entire pack. It is already affecting it. He paused. I've seen this before. Twice in my years. Once the man held the maid bond and spent 20 years slowly becoming a ghost of himself. Once, he stopped. Once it was corrected. Corrected, my father repeated. The bond was released, Rowan said. The silence that followed had weight. Real, physical weight. My father looked at Caelum. Caelum was looking at the floor. This is not a decision for this room, Caelum said finally. Or this moment. No, Rowan agreed. But it is a conversation that needed to happen. He looked at me again with those ancient, precise eyes. You have been carrying this without telling anyone. Yes, I said. Why? Because the alternative was hurting my sister. Rowan was quiet. And if hurt is inevitable, he said. I had no answer. Or rather, I had an answer. I simply couldn't make myself say it in a room with my father and the man who was bound to my sister and an elder who had seen everything twice already. I pressed my hands flat on my knees. I need air, I said. No one stopped me. I walked out of the hall and I kept walking, through the settlement, past the outer cottages, onto the forest path, and I did not stop until the trees were thick around me and the sounds of the settlement had become something distant and manageable. I found a fallen tree and I sat on it. And I let myself feel, for the first time in 9 days, without filtering it. It was considerable. Mira found me 20 minutes later. She had an instinct for location that I had long since stopped questioning. She sat on the fallen tree beside me without a word and handed me a strip of dried meat from her pocket, utterly practical, entirely Mira, and waited. Elder Rowan knows, I said. I know he knows, she said. He came to me 4 days ago. Asked questions about the old texts. She paused. I told him what I'd read. He told my father. What did your father say? He looked like a man who'd discovered his best political arrangement might have a crack in it. And Caelum? I thought about the way he'd stood at the edge of the room. He said it wasn't a decision for that moment, I said. Mira was quiet. He's right, she said. I know. But it's coming. I know. We sat on the fallen tree for a while in the dappled forest light. Then Mira said, Seren. What do you actually want? Not what's right. Not what protects everyone. What do you want? I opened my mouth. Closed it. The question was so simple. The simplest question available. And I had been so thoroughly trained, by circumstance, by practice, by the long habit of smallness, to not ask it of myself that the answer took a long time to arrive. When it came quietly. Like something that had been waiting very patiently just below the surface. I want to be seen, I said. By someone who sees all of it. Not the useful parts. Not the background. All of it. Mira was very still. And he does, she said. I thought about the oak tree. The boundary stone. The north yard in the dark. Yes, I said. Just that. Just yes. And it was the most honest thing I had said in 9 days. I went back to the settlement as the afternoon was thinning. I had made no decision. But something had shifted, the way things shift when you stop pretending a question doesn't exist and admit it is sitting in the center of your life, waiting. I came around the side of the great hall on the path toward the herb stores. And I almost walked directly into Lyra. She was standing on the path, her arms wrapped around herself, her golden hair loose today instead of braided. Her face was not doing its easy, uncomplicated thing. It was doing something I had never seen it do. It was afraid. Lyra, I said immediately. What? I need you to tell me the truth, she said. Her voice was not unkind. It was not accusatory. It was the voice of someone who has been standing on the edge of something for a long time and has finally decided to step off it. My blood went cold. Tell me what you don't. She looked at me steadily. Eyes that were the same shape as mine, the same family blueprint, but gold where mine were gray. I've been watching you for 9 days and pretending I wasn't. I've been watching him for 9 days. And I've been trying to find another explanation. Any explanation that isn't? She stopped. A breath. I'm not stupid, Seren, she said quietly. I know people think of me a certain way. Easy and uncomplicated and not particularly perceptive. But I love you. I have loved you my entire life. And I know every version of your face that exists. And the face you've been wearing for 9 days is not any of them. I could not speak. Talk to me, she said. Please. The path was very quiet. The late afternoon light was gold and long-shadowed. And I looked at my sister, my golden, uncomplicated, entirely innocent, not stupid sister, and I felt the exact moment when the weight of what I had been carrying became too heavy to carry alone. Lyra, I said. My voice broke on her name. Just that. Just her name. And she made a sound, small but pained, and crossed the distance between us and put her arms around me the way she had when we were small. When I used to have nightmares and she would come from her room without being called, as if she always knew. Tell me, she whispered. And I did. Not everything. Not the details, not the moon conversations, not the oak tree or the boundary stone or what Rowan had said this afternoon. But the truth of it. The shape of it. The thing that had been pulling in my chest since the ceremony and had not stopped and was not getting smaller. I told her. And she held me through it. And when I finished, we stood on the path for a long time in the golden afternoon light. 2 sisters. One impossible truth between us. How long have you known? She asked. Quiet. Since the ceremony, I said. A pause. And him? I stopped. I think before. Another pause. Longer. When she pulled back to look at my face, her eyes were full, not spilling, but full. Like water at the edge of a cup. I'm not angry at you, she said. Lyra. I'm not. Firm. Steady. You didn't choose this. He didn't choose this. She pressed her lips together. I'm something. But it isn't anger at you. I'm sorry, I said. I'm so sorry. I know you are. She took both my hands. Held them. I have always known, she said softly, that he doesn't look at me the way the stories say. The words fell into the quiet like stones. I thought it would come, she said. I thought it would grow. That time and closeness and she stopped. I hoped. Lyra. I hoped very hard, she said. And hoping very hard is something I am very good at. I looked at her. She looked back. And between us, in the warm, terrible honesty of that moment, something that had been tangled became, very slowly, clear. Not resolved. Not healed. But clear. I don't know what happens next, I said. Neither do I, she said. She squeezed my hands. She let them go. But she stopped. Steadied herself. I need tonight to think. Alone. She looked at me with eyes that were full and afraid and braver than anything I'd ever seen. Don't disappear on me, Seren. Whatever happens. Promise me that. I promise, I said. She nodded once. She walked back toward the hall. I stood on the path and watched her go. And in my chest, the pull was still there. Still constant. Still unbearably, achingly real. But beside it now, equally real, equally present, was something that felt like the beginning of something terrible being lanced. Like a wound that has to hurt more before it can start to heal. Chapter 9. That night, no one slept. I knew this the way you know things in a pack, not from direct observation but from the quality of the dark. The particular silence of a settlement where too many people are lying awake with their eyes open. Mira confirmed it in the morning. Lyra was in the hall until past midnight, she said. Sitting at the long table alone. One candle. And him? The north yard. I saw him through the gap in the gate. Training alone in the dark. She paused. He does that when something is eating at him. Voss told me once. I thought about Caelum in the dark north yard with a blade and no opponent. I thought about Lyra at the long table with one candle. I thought about myself lying on my low bed with my hand on my chest and the pull doing its constant, relentless thing. We had all arrived, by separate paths, at the same crossroads. And the crossroads had only two directions. I did not go to the herb beds that morning. I went to Elder Rowan. He was in his small chamber at the hall's north end, the one that smelled of old parchment and dried thistle and the particular mustiness of a room used for long, serious thought. He was seated at his table when I arrived, as though he had been expecting me, which given the quality of his perception was probably accurate. Sit, he said. I sat. Ask what you came to ask, he said. The release, I said. The one you mentioned. The bond being released. I met his eyes. How does that work? What does it require? Rowan looked at me for a moment. It requires the consent of both parties in the bond, he said. Both must agree freely. Neither coerced. And the process? A counter-ceremony. Simpler than the binding, the unraveling is always simpler than the making. He paused. The thread is cut. The moon releases the maid bond. The true call is freed. He set his hands flat on the table. It causes pain. To both parties. The unraveling is not comfortable. And after? After, the maid bond is dissolved. What remains, he paused. What the moon built continues. It was always there. It simply has room now. I absorbed this. Lyra, I said. She would need to agree. She is one party in the bond, Rowan said. Yes. I thought about yesterday. The path. Her hands around mine. I hoped very hard. Would she be protected? I said. After? In terms of the pack standing, bloodline alliance, my father's? The Alpha's obligation to the Aldrich bloodline does not dissolve with the personal bond, Rowan said. The political alliance stands. The mountain passes remain. The border security your father bargained for remains. He looked at me steadily. Your sister would not be abandoned. She would not be disgraced. The release, if made, is made honorably. The room was very quiet. You've already spoken to the Alpha about this, I said. I have. What did he say? He said the decision is not his alone to make. A pause. He said, specifically, that he would accept whatever you chose. My breath stopped. Me? I said. You, Rowan said. Not your father. Not the Pack Council. You, Seren. His ancient eyes were very clear. He is an Alpha who has spent his entire life making decisions from strategy. This is the first decision he has named as belonging to someone else. The full weight of that landed. Slowly. Like something enormous being set down very carefully. I stopped. I need to speak to my sister. I know, Rowan said. Before I can give you any answer. I know, he said again. I stood. He looked up at me. Seren, he said. You have spent a long time making yourself small so that other people could be comfortable. He said it without judgment, without drama. Simply, as a fact. Whatever you decide today, decide it as the person you actually are. Not the one you've been pretending to be. I looked at him. I nodded. I left. I found Lyra in the place I somehow already knew she'd be. The small room behind the herb stores. My room. She was sitting on the low bed with her knees drawn up and the old green cloak I'd had since I was 16 wrapped around her shoulders, because the room was cold in the mornings and she had always borrowed my things without asking. She looked up when I came in. She had been crying. Not recently, the marks were dried, her eyes slightly swollen. But she had been crying at some point during the night and had come to my room afterward, and something about that choice, of all the places available to her, made my throat do something complicated. I sat beside her. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then Lyra said, Rowan came to see me this morning. He told you about the release, I said. Yes. She looked down at the cloak she was wrapped in. Ran her thumb along the worn hem. He was very gentle about it. For a man who always looks like he's about to pronounce judgment. Did you? I stopped. What did you say to him? I said I needed to speak to you first. We looked at each other. Tell me honestly, I said. All of it. Not what you think I need to hear. Lyra was quiet. A long time quiet. Then, I feel like a fool, she said. Lyra. Not about you. About me. About, she pressed her lips together. I knew, Seren. Somewhere I knew it wasn't right. The way he was present but, not. The way everything was correct and nothing was, she stopped. Nothing was warm. I kept thinking, it will come. You just need time. You just need. You're not a fool, I said. I feel like one. You trusted. That's not foolishness. She looked at me. Her eyes were full again. I don't want to lose him, she said. I want to be very honest with you about that. Some part of me wanted to make it work. Some part of me wanted to be the woman who, she stopped. Who could make even the wrong bond feel like the right one? A pause. That part is very loud this morning. I know, I said. But. She breathed. But there is another part. A quieter part. She looked down at the cloak again. That knows it cannot be made true through wanting. And that me holding on to something that isn't mine, not really, not truly, doesn't protect me. It just delays the hurt. The room was very still. Lyra, I said carefully. What do you want? She laughed, a small, pained sound. You asked me that the way I asked you yesterday, she said. I know. A pause. I want to be loved, she said. Quietly. Without pretense. The way the stories say. The real way. The way where someone looks at you and something in them recognizes something in you and she stopped. I want that. Not a bond made from mountain passes and border security. I took her hand. She squeezed it. And what are you to him, she asked. Looking at me steadily. I don't know yet, I said. But you feel it. Yes. And he does too. Yes. She nodded slowly. The nod of someone absorbing something enormous and choosing, deliberately, to remain upright. Then I think she stopped. Steadied herself. I think holding on to something that belongs to someone else is not who I want to be. Her jaw set, and in that moment, I saw something in her face I had never quite seen before. Not beauty. Strength. Clear and unadorned. I want the release. Lyra. I do. Firmer now. Chosen. Not because I don't hurt. I do. I hurt quite a lot. She lifted her chin. But because I'd rather hurt cleanly than hold wrong things. She looked at me. Do you understand? Yes, I whispered. Good. She squeezed my hand once more. Now go tell Rowan. I looked at her. Will you be all right? She gave me a look that was almost her usual ease but with something harder underneath. I am Lyra Aldrich, she said. I have never been less than all right in my entire life. I'm not starting today. A sound came out of me. Not quite laughter. Not quite a sob. Something between them. She pulled me into a brief, fierce embrace. Don't make me regret this, she whispered. Never, I said. She let me go. I stood. And I walked out of my small room and into the morning and toward whatever came next. I went to Rowan first. She agrees, I told him. Tell me when and how. He told me. Evening. The binding stone. Specific words. The crimson thread cut, not burned, not buried. Cut cleanly and left for the earth. I nodded. I went to find Caelum. He was in the north yard. Not training this time. Sitting on the low stone wall at the yard's edge, forearms on his knees, looking at the ground with an expression I had not seen him wear before. Unguarded. Like a man who has put down something very heavy and hasn't yet decided what to do with his hands. He looked up when I came in. I stood in the center of the yard. Rowan told you what she said, I said. Yes, he said. And you said the decision was mine. Yes. Why? He looked at me steadily. Because you have been making yourself small for other people your entire life, he said. And this is yours, Seren. Whatever happens next, this choice is yours. My throat did the complicated thing again. I spoke to Lyra, I said. She agrees. She wants the release. He stood. Slowly. And you, he said. I looked at him. In the morning light of the north yard, with the settlement moving quietly around us and the oak tree visible over the wall and everything that had happened in the last 9 days sitting in the air between us like weather. I want to know, I said. What this actually is. Without the stone pressing down on it. I want to know what it feels like when it has room. He took a breath. Something in his face, the last piece of the wall, came down. Just slightly. Just enough. Tonight, he said. Tonight, I agreed. We stood in the north yard and looked at each other. Not touching. Not crossing any of the distances still between us. But something had changed, something fundamental and enormous and entirely, irrevocably real. Something that the moon had been patient about for a very long time had just been given, for the first time, the shape of a possibility. And the day that remained before evening was going to be the longest day of my life. Chapter 10. The day moved the way days move before something irrevocable. Too slowly. Every hour thick with the weight of what was coming. Every ordinary sound, the ring of the blacksmith's hammer, the children calling to each other across the yard, the distant rhythm of a patrol returning through the east gate, carrying a strange, heightened quality. Like the world was aware that something was about to change inside it and was paying attention in a way it usually didn't bother to. I spent the morning doing ordinary things. This was deliberate. I ground the stone wheat I'd harvested. I sorted the dried moonbract into the clay jars I kept labeled in my careful, small handwriting. I swept the herb room floor twice, once because it needed it and once because my hands required occupation. Ordinary things. Because extraordinary things were coming and I needed the ordinary to hold me in place until they arrived. My father came to me at mid-morning. He stood in the doorway of the herb room with his hands clasped behind his back and his expression doing the complicated calculation I had watched it do my entire life, weighing, measuring, deciding what this cost him and what it was worth. Rowan spoke to me, he said. I know, I said. The political alliance. Stands, I said. Rowan confirmed it. The mountain passes, the border security, everything you negotiated. The release doesn't touch any of it. He was quiet. Your sister has made her own choice, I said. Freely. Rowan witnessed her consent. Another silence. And you, he said. What are you expecting from this? I looked at him. This man who had managed me and measured me and positioned me and never once, in my entire life, sat down with me and asked what I felt. Who was asking now, not because he wanted to know, but because he was trying to calculate the outcome. I'm not expecting anything, I said. I'm just making room. For whatever is true. He looked at me for a long moment. Something crossed his face that might, in different circumstances, have been an apology. You've always been more than you showed, he said. He said it simply. Like it was obvious. Like it cost him nothing. He turned and walked away. I stood in the herb room and held the clay jar in my hands and breathed through the particular complicated grief of a person whose father has just seen them, clearly and completely, a few decades too late. Mira came at noon with food I didn't eat and company I needed. She sat across from me and didn't speak about the ceremony. She talked instead about small things, a bird's nest she'd found in the eaves of the storage building, a ridiculous argument two of the junior warriors had gotten into over the correct way to sharpen a blade. She talked the way you talk to someone who needs the world to feel normal and manageable for a little while. I loved her for it. At the end, as she was standing to go, she paused. Seren, she said. Yes. Whatever happens tonight, and after tonight, you are allowed to take up space. She said it simply. Without drama. You've been hovering at the edges your entire life. You're allowed to stand in the center of something. I looked at her. Even if it's hard, she said. Even if it's uncomfortable. Even if people have to rearrange themselves to make room for you. She paused. You're allowed. She left. I sat with those words for a long time. You're allowed. As though permission was a thing I had simply never been given. As though someone saying it could make it real. I decided to believe it could. Lyra found me late in the afternoon. She was composed, the particular composure of someone who has cried everything they needed to cry and arrived on the other side of it with their spine straight and their chin up. She was wearing the blue dress with the silver thread. She had done her hair. She looked, I thought, more beautiful than I had ever seen her. Not in spite of the pain but somehow because of it, like the thing she'd been carrying and chosen to put down had uncovered something underneath that had always been there. I wanted to see you before, she said. Before, I repeated. Yes. She sat beside me on the herb room bench. Close. Shoulder to shoulder. I've been thinking all day. About what comes after. And I think, she paused. I think I've been so busy being the easy one, the beautiful one, the one everyone chooses, that I've never had to figure out who I am when things are difficult. She looked at her hands in her lap. This is difficult. And I'm still here. So, that's something. That's everything, I said. She looked at me sideways. You're going to be insufferably happy, aren't you, she said. Not quite a question. Not quite a complaint. Something in my chest moved, light and afraid in equal measure. I don't know yet, I said honestly. You will be, she said. Certain. I know you, Seren. You've been carrying something for so long without letting it show. When you finally, she stopped. Looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then, with the precision of someone being very honest, he's going to see all of you. All the parts you've kept hidden. And it's going to be terrifying and perfect in equal parts. My throat tightened. Lyra, I said. Don't. Her voice steady. Don't apologize again. You've apologized enough. She took my hand. Squeezed it. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to figure out what Lyra Aldrich actually is when she's not performing being chosen. She squeezed once more. And you're going to stop hiding in herb rooms. A sound came out of me. Half laugh. Half something more fragile. Both of those things, she said firmly. Promise me. I promise, I said. She stood. She smoothed her dress. She walked to the door and paused. One more thing, she said without turning. Yes. If he ever looks at you the way I hoped he'd look at me, her voice was careful. Even. Controlled. Let him. She walked out. I sat in the silence she left behind. And I thought, there are kinds of courage I have underestimated my whole life. And most of them belonged to my sister. The evening arrived as evening does, without drama, without ceremony, with simply the sun lowering through the western trees and the light changing from gold to amber to the deep, saturated blue of early dark. The pack went about its evening rituals. Fires were lit. The hall filled with the smell of supper. Voices rose and fell in the familiar patterns of a settlement ending its day. Elder Rowan assembled quietly. No announcement. No gathered crowd. This was not a ceremony for witnesses. Just the four of us, Rowan, Lyra, Caelum, and I, at the binding stone in the small grove beside the great hall. The same stone where 3 weeks ago, the crimson thread had been tied. Torchlight tonight. 2 torches set at either side of the stone, throwing warm, moving shadows across the bark and the granite and our faces. Lyra stood across from Caelum. I stood 3 steps back. Caelum glanced at me once, a look that said everything it needed to say in under a second, and then looked at Elder Rowan. Rowan held the thread. The same crimson thread. Still tied as it had been, looped, knotted, the ends trailing. This release, Rowan said, in the old tongue, is made freely and without coercion. Both parties of the maid bond agree. The moon is asked to witness and to receive what is returned. Lyra's chin was up. Her eyes were bright with something that was not tears. I release this bond, she said. Freely given, freely returned. Caelum, I release this bond. I hold no claim. I carry no resentment. I return it to the moon with gratitude for the woman who held it with grace. Lyra blinked. Fast. The composure held. Barely. Rowan took the thread between both hands. He paused. Looked at Lyra. She nodded. He cut it. A single clean motion. The thread fell in 2 pieces. Rowan placed both pieces on the surface of the stone and stepped back. And then I felt it. From 3 steps away, I felt it, the moment the maid bond broke. Not like a sound. Not like a physical sensation exactly. More like a pressure that has been present so long you stopped noticing it, suddenly lifting. Like a room you've been breathing stale air in, suddenly open to the outside. Like something that had been pressed down had released, not explosively, not dramatically, but completely. I pressed my hand to my chest. The pull was still there. But it was different now. Not straining against something. Just present. Open. Like a door that has been unlocked and is now simply standing ready. Caelum exhaled. The sound of it, involuntary, deep, like something that had been held too long finally let go, was the most human sound I had ever heard from him. Lyra stood for a moment with her eyes closed. Then she opened them. She looked at Rowan. Thank you, she said. She looked at Caelum. Something passed between them, not the thing the bond had been, but the thing that remained when you survive something painful together. Respect. Honesty. The bare, clean acknowledgement of 2 people who tried what they tried and can look each other in the face. He inclined his head. She turned. She walked past me. She paused just beside me, close enough that her shoulder brushed mine. Go, she said. Very quietly. Just to me. She walked away into the torchlit evening. And I watched her go straight-backed, golden, braver than anything, and I thought, I will spend the rest of my life making sure she knows what she is worth. Rowan collected the cut thread from the stone. He looked between Caelum and me with those ancient, precise eyes. The rest, he said, is between you and the moon. He left. And we were alone. Chapter 11. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The torches burned at either side of the binding stone. The grove was dark and close around us, the old trees pressing in, the night air cool and sharp with the smell of pine and cold earth. Caelum stood 6 feet away. The same distance as the boundary stone. The same distance as the north yard. All the distances we had held. I was very aware of my own heartbeat. Not the syncopated searching thing. Something steadier. Something that had found, or was finding, its proper rhythm. Seren, he said. I know, I said. I want to say it, he said. I looked at him. Then say it, I said. He crossed the 6 feet in 2 steps. Not slowly. Not hesitantly. With the direct, complete certainty of a man who has been held back from something for 3 weeks and has run out of reasons to stay held. He stopped in front of me. Close enough that I could detect that storm and iron scent, and beneath it, clearer now than it had ever been, the thing that my blood had been trying to tell me since the ceremony. Home. That scent. That impossible, specific, entirely irrational scent that had nothing to do with anything I could name and everything to do with something far older than names. I have dreamed of you every night since the ceremony, he said. His voice, low, stripped of every layer of control, was the most honest sound I had heard from him. And in some of them, you were standing in a forest I didn't know. And in some of them, you were here. In this settlement. In the places I have watched you from the distance I was keeping. He paused. And in every single one of them, I knew what you were before I had words for it. I could not look away from him. What was I? I said. Mine, he said. In the specific way the moon means that word. Not possession. Not ownership. He searched for it. The person whose absence makes a room wrong. The person whose voice is the one you learn to listen for without deciding to. He paused. The person who smells like home. The grove was very quiet. You said that, I said. In the dream. You said she doesn't smell like home. I said it to Voss, he said. About Lyra. And even as I said it, he stopped. Even as I said it, I knew what did. Who did? His jaw tightened. And I had just bound myself to the wrong person and there was nothing I could do about it and I spent every day since performing the life I had built and every night being told, very clearly, by something I could not argue with. That you'd made a mistake, I said. That I'd made a mistake. I looked up at him. This enormous, controlled, iron-willed man. Who climbed trees to think. Who had run out of comfortable lies 3 weeks ago and had been carrying the truth ever since. You should have waited, I said. Yes, he said. You should have waited for the moon's call. Yes. And instead you chose strategy. Yes. His voice rough. And I would do it differently. I would wait. I would, he stopped. His hands, those large, controlled hands, moved slightly at his sides. Not reaching. Just restless. I cannot undo what was made. I can only be present for what comes after. And what comes after? I said. He looked at me. For a long moment he simply looked at me, the way he'd looked that very first night, across the ceremony clearing, before the binding, when his gaze had moved to me without his permission. But there was nothing between us now. No thread. No promise. No carefully maintained distance. Just space. Open, aching, finally available space. Whatever you'll allow, he said. At whatever pace you set. His jaw set, not with control but with sincerity. With the particular seriousness of a man who means every word he is about to say. I will not rush you, Seren. I will not press you. I am very aware that I have handled the entirety of this badly and that you have shown a quality of grace and steadiness that I have not deserved. He paused. But I will not pretend. I cannot pretend that what this is to me is small. Because it is not small. It is the least small thing that has ever happened to me. I stared at him. Somewhere, distantly, I heard the settlement's evening sounds, the hall, the fire, the ordinary world going about itself. And here, in the torch-lit grove beside the binding stone, the world that mattered right now. You're very serious, I said. Something shifted in his face. I am always very serious, he said. You laugh, I said. I've seen it. Or almost. The corner of your mouth, in the tree. The almost thing happened again. The corner of his mouth. Almost, he said. You need more practice, I said. Probably, he said. I've been told I'm better at strategy than warmth. You climbed a tree before dawn to sit and think, I said. And remembered a letter carved in bark by an 8-year-old. I paused. That's not someone who lacks warmth. That's someone who doesn't know what to do with it. He was very still. Yes, he said quietly. I know that feeling, I said. I know you do. We looked at each other. And the almost smile, the thing I had been watching for 3 weeks from careful distances, completed itself. Slowly. Slightly. But entirely real. And it was, I thought, the most devastating thing I had ever seen. Seren, he said. Yes. Can I? He stopped. The alpha, the iron wolf, who had never hesitated in front of anything, visibly gathered himself. Can I be closer to you than this? Not a command. A question. And the fact that he asked it, that he stood 6 inches away with his hands at his sides and his face open and asked, with all his power and all his history, with the specific humility of someone who understood that this particular permission was not his to take. I reached up. And I put my hand flat against his chest. Center of his sternum. Where I had been pressing my own hand for 3 weeks. He stopped breathing. I felt it, beneath my palm, the thing I had felt in my own chest every day since the ceremony. The pulse. The particular rhythm. Searching. Finding. Recognizing. It's the same, I said, looking up at him. Quiet. Wondering. Yours does the same thing mine does. Yes, he said. The word barely a breath. Since when? The moment I walked into the ceremony clearing. He put his hand over mine, carefully, like he was afraid I'd pull away. Before I ever saw your face clearly. I smelled home. And I looked for it. And my eyes found your sister because she was the one I was supposed to be looking for. His hand pressed mine more firmly against his chest. And then I looked further, to the edges of the clearing, and there you were. Hiding, I said. Standing apart, he said. Like someone who had learned the edges were safer than the center. My throat tightened. They were, I said. They were, he agreed. And they don't need to be. Not anymore. He looked down at our hands, his covering mine, and something in him that had been locked for a very long time released. Not with me. The torches burned. The grove was quiet. And I thought, this is the moment. Not the one on the full moon night, not the north yard, not the oak tree. This one. This specific, torchlit, terrifying, finally open moment. Caelum, I said. Yes. Stop talking, I said. He looked at me. I looked at him. And I reached up with my free hand and pulled him down toward me by the front of his cloak, and the distance that had existed between us since the first night closed in a single, irreversible breath. The first touch of his forehead against mine was nothing like I expected. Not electric. Not dramatic. Just complete. Like a sound that had been searching for its echo, finally finding it. Like a key in a lock. Like 2 things that belong together, recognizing each other in the simplest, most fundamental way. We stood like that, the foreheads touching, eyes closed, the torchlight warm on both our faces, and breathed. Just breathed. Together. And in my chest, the pull that had been straining toward him for 3 weeks settled. Like an animal lying down. Like a river finding its bed. Like something coming home after a very long time away. Oh, I said. Barely a sound. Yes, he said. Not moving. Just breathing. Just present. His hand moved from mine to my face, one large palm against my jaw, thumb tracing a line from my cheekbone to my chin, learning the shape of it with the careful attention of someone committing something to memory. I see you, he said. Voice rough and low and entirely without performance. I felt those words in every part of me. Every part that had ever stood at the edges of rooms and made itself small and pressed its back against oak trees and said, it doesn't matter, I don't need to be seen. Every single one of those parts heard that sentence. And I pressed my face into his hand and said nothing because there were no words available. There were only his hands, warm and careful, and the torchlight, and the grove, and the moon beginning to rise above the eastern trees. Watching. As she always watched. With absolute, patient certainty. We stayed in the grove until the torches burned low. Not speaking much. Not needing to. There is a particular kind of silence that doesn't feel like absence. The kind that exists between people who have finally stopped performing for each other and can simply be in the same space without it costing anything. That was this silence. I leaned against the binding stone with his cloak around my shoulders. He'd put it there without asking, without ceremony, just taken it from his own shoulders and wrapped it around mine when he noticed me shiver. And he sat beside me with his long legs stretched out and his head tipped back against the stone, looking up at the sky. "What happens tomorrow?" I said. "What do you want to happen tomorrow?" I thought about it. "I want breakfast," I said. "At the main table. Not the far end." He turned his head to look at me. "The center," he said. "Near enough," I said. The almost smile. "Done," he said. "And I paused. I want my role in the pack to be real. Not visible for politics. Not managed into positions that serve my father's calculations. Actually real. I know the herbs. I know the medicinal stores. I know the territorial maps better than most of the junior warriors." I looked at him. "I've just never been given reason to say so." He held my gaze. Something shifted in his expression. "The ash pack situation requires someone with knowledge of the northern terrain's plant cover," he said. "For supply route assessment. Do you know the mountain flora?" "I know every plant on 3 peaks," I said. He nodded slowly. "Then you're on the council," he said. I stared at him. "Not as someone with relevant expertise," he said. "Because you have it." He paused. "I should have noticed sooner." "You were a bit distracted," I said. "I was performing a strategy," he said. "And missing everything that mattered." I looked at him for a moment. "Not everything," I said. "No," he said. "Not everything." He walked me back to the outer cottage path when the torches finally guttered. At the edge of the path, where the stones of the settlement gave way to the packed earth track, he stopped. I stopped. We stood in the dark between the settlement and the outer buildings, and he looked at me with that expression, the one with all the walls down, and said, "I will be patient, Seren. With all of it. Whatever you need." "I know," I said. "And I need you to know that this," he paused. "What this is, what it's been since the ceremony, I have never once in my life felt anything like it. Not with strategy. Not with battle. Not with anything I've won or built or survived." He looked at me steadily. "You are not a mistake corrected. You are not a second choice. You are the first real thing I have chosen in a very long time." The dark path was very quiet. "Caelum," I said. "Yes." "Tomorrow," I said. "Breakfast. Main table." The corner of his mouth. "Breakfast," he agreed. "Main table." He lifted my hand. Pressed his mouth to my knuckles, brief, warm, deliberate. Let it go. Stepped back. "Good night, Seren." "Good night," I said. I walked up the path to my cottage. I did not look back. But I heard him stand there, heard the stillness of him, until I reached my door. And when I closed it behind me and stood in the dark of my small room, I pressed my hand to my chest for the last time. The pull was there. But it was home now. Not a search. A presence. I lay down. And for the first time in 3 weeks, I slept deeply, completely, without restlessness. The moon moved across the sky above the timber roof. Content, apparently, with what had finally been allowed to be. Chapter 12. 3 months later, the Ash Pack sent a formal envoy. Not scouts. Not probing warriors crossing boundary lines in the dark. An envoy. 3 senior wolves, riding under the White Branch truce sign, asking for a council meeting at the Neutral Ridge crossing. This was, by any territorial standard, significant. This was the Ash Pack acknowledging that whatever they had been testing, the stability of the alliance, the solidity of the Drevon pack structure, the question of whether the mating bond they'd been watching would hold under pressure, had returned an answer they weren't prepared for. The answer had been, yes. Firmly. I was in the council chamber when the envoy's request was delivered. Not at the doorway. Not in the storage alcove through a gap in the old timber. At the table. Seated beside Voss, with the territorial maps spread out in front of me, the ones I'd been annotating for 6 weeks, adding the flora notations and supply route assessments and the particular winter knowledge of the northern peaks that none of the warriors had thought to record before. Caelum read the envoy's message twice. Then he set it on the table and looked at me. Northern Ridge Crossing, he said. You know it. 2 entry points, I said. The visible one and the one through the birchwood that floods in spring but is passable all winter. They'll expect us to use the main path. I paused. I wouldn't. Voss made a sound that might have been approval. Why not? Caelum said. Because arriving from the birchwood means we've shown knowledge of the terrain they assumed we didn't have. It shifts the dynamic before anyone speaks a word. Caelum looked at me for a moment. The council table was watching this exchange with the particular attentiveness of people who have learned, over 6 weeks, that the quiet woman with the plant-stained hands consistently says things worth listening to. We use the birchwood, Caelum said. Seren leads the terrain briefing before we ride. Commander Voss nodded. No one at the table questioned it. This, I had learned, was how things changed. Not dramatically. Not with announcement. Simply, by someone showing up and doing the work, until the space they occupied stopped feeling borrowed and started feeling built. The changes in those 3 months were not all simple. My father had needed several careful conversations before he'd stopped trying to position me as an extension of his political strategy and started seeing me as something else. Something he didn't quite have words for, which meant he defaulted to a slightly baffled respect that was, in its own way, more valuable. Asha Ren had surprised me. After the release, I had expected coldness. Rivalry. The continuation of whatever the herb garden conversation had begun. Instead, she had come to me one morning at the forest's edge, alone, no performance, no pleasant surface hiding something else, and said, I wanted to be angry. And? I said. And I'm not. She had looked at the trees for a moment. I knew what he and I were. I knew for years. I just hoped the knowing was wrong. She paused. It wasn't. I'm sorry, I said. Don't be. She looked at me directly, those amber eyes, honest and a little tired. You didn't take anything that was mine. I understand that now. A pause. I'd like to not be your enemy. You never were, I said. She had looked at me for a moment. Then she'd nodded, short, practical, the nod of someone closing a ledger, and walked back toward the settlement. She had been on 2 joint patrols with me since. She was formidably good company when she wasn't performing. Lyra was the hardest. Not because she was unkind, she never was. But because watching someone you love absorb a loss with dignity is its own particular ache, and there were days when I looked at her and felt the complicated weight of everything that had made this possible. But Lyra, it turned out, had been right about herself. She was finding out who she was when things were difficult. She had taken on the management of the pack's winter provisions, a role that required the organizational mind she'd always had and the authority she'd never been given reason to use. She was exceptionally good at it. She had made 3 new friendships among the Alpha's household that she described, with some wonder, as the first friendships she'd chosen for herself rather than been assigned by position. She had laughed, genuinely, at something I'd said, about 2 weeks after the release ceremony. Not the performance laugh. The real one. And I had felt something in me ease that I hadn't known was still held. One evening I had found her on the outer cottage path, looking up at the stars, and I had stood beside her and we had been quiet together for a long time. Are you all right? I'd asked. Getting there, she'd said. That's enough, I'd said. I know, she'd said. And then she'd linked her arm through mine and leaned her head on my shoulder and we'd stood like that until the cold drove us inside. Getting there was, I had decided, more than enough. Getting there was, in fact, everything. Caelum, in those 3 months, was different from what I had expected. Not easier. Not simpler. But real. He was not a comfortable man. He was exacting and direct and had opinions that required engagement rather than agreement and a particular intensity of focus that could be, occasionally, overwhelming. He was also someone who remembered how I took my morning drink, no honey, strong, who had carved 30 minutes into his council schedule 3 times a week without explaining why until I realized it was the exact time I usually passed the north yard on my way from the herb stores, who had started, slowly and with visible effort, practicing the completion of his almost smiles. He was learning warmth the way he learned everything else. With absolute seriousness and total commitment. It was, against all reason, one of the things I loved most about him. That thought, loved, arrived one morning without announcement and sat down in my chest like it had always lived there. I didn't fight it. I had spent enough of my life fighting things that were simply true. We were at the boundary stone the evening I told him. Not planned, we had walked out from the settlement after the council session, in that companionable silence that had become one of my favorite things, and ended up at the grove the way we often ended up there. Like the place had a gravity we'd simply stopped resisting. The stone was dark in the evening light. The cut thread was long gone, returned to the earth. What remained was just stone. Old, solid, utterly indifferent to what happened around it. "I've been thinking," I said. "Tell me," he said. He was standing beside me, close enough that his arm was against mine. "About what Mira said to me. Before all of this." I paused. "She said I was allowed to take up space. To stand in the center of something." "She was right," he said. "I know that now." I looked at the stone. I spent so long managing myself at the edges that I forgot there was a version of me that didn't need to be managed. That could just be present. Take up the space I actually occupy. I glanced at him. "You helped with that." "You did that," he said. "You saw me," I said. "From the beginning. Even when you were trying not to." I turned to face him. "You saw all of it. The herb room and the tree and the staying away and the staying up nights and..." I stopped. Steadied. "You saw me and you didn't look away. Even when looking was inconvenient. Even when it cost you something." I held his gaze. Nobody had done that before. He was very still. "Seren. I love you," I said. Simple. Quiet. Without staging. "Just the truth," said plainly, in the place where we had both stood in the dark and been honest before we knew how to be anything else. His breath left him. Not dramatically. Just, completely. Like every managed exhale of the past 3 months releasing at once. He turned to face me fully. Put both hands on my face. Looked at me with those dark, forest-deep eyes. "I have loved you," he said, "since before I had permission to." His voice rough. Real. Since the ceremony clearing and the oak tree and every hall where I looked at the opposite wall from where you were sitting and thought about you anyway. He pressed his forehead to mine. "I love you, Seren. All of you. The parts you show and the parts you've been hiding and the parts you haven't discovered yet." He pulled back just enough to look at my face. "All of it." I looked at him. This serious, tree-climbing, almost smiling, finally warmth-learning man. "You're getting better at that," I said. "At what?" "Saying true things." The corner of his mouth. "I have a good teacher," he said. And I laughed, the real, unguarded kind, and he pulled me against his chest and I felt his heartbeat under my palm for the 100th time and it did what it always did. Found its rhythm. Found mine. And stayed. Spring came to the Drevon territory with the particular insistence of springs that follow hard winters. The snowmelt came fast off the mountains, filling the pack's 3 rivers to their banks, turning the forest floor into a mosaic of mud and new green that smelled, on the best mornings, like everything beginning. I noticed it at the herb beds first, the way I noticed most things. The moonbract coming up strong from its winter roots. The stoneweed pushing through the cold earth with the patient determination of plants that have done this before and know it works. I was on my knees in the soft mud when he found me. He always found me. I had stopped being surprised by it, that particular certainty he had of where I would be. Like he had simply internalized my patterns the way he internalized everything else. Thoroughly. Permanently. "Council in an hour," he said, crouching down beside me. "I know," I said. "I'll be there." He looked at what I was doing, the careful separation of the moonbract crowns, the mud on my hands, the focused attention I brought to small things. He had told me once that watching me work was one of his preferred ways to think. I had told him that was an extremely strange thing to say. He had said most true things were. "The Ash Pack envoy confirmed the Northern Alliance terms," he said. "I know. Voss told me. Your read on the Birchwood approach was exactly right. They hadn't expected it." "They wouldn't," I said. "People rarely expect the path that looks less obvious." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "They don't." I looked at him sideways. He had that expression, the one I had been cataloging for months now, the one that sat somewhere between the almost smile and something deeper and quieter. The expression he wore when he was simply present. Simply here. Not performing. Not managing. Not calculating the strategic yield of the next decision. Just here. With me. In the mud, in the spring morning, in the ordinary specific gravity of a life being built. "You're staring," I said. "Yes," he said. "Is there a reason?" "I'm trying to memorize it," he said. "This particular version of you. Mud on your hands, looking at plants, completely unbothered by anything." "I'm bothered by plenty of things," I said. "Not right now." I looked at him. "No," I said. "Not right now." The Ash Pack alliance held. The mountain passes remained secured. My father, in his own way, eventually came to understand that his quieter daughter had become something he hadn't planned for but could no longer ignore. He came to the council sessions. He listened. He occasionally, in the careful way of a man who had never quite learned how to do it naturally, said things that were almost praise. I accepted them. I didn't need them the way I once had. That was, perhaps, the truest measure of what had changed. Lyra left the settlement in late winter. Not in exile, in choice. She had found, through the new connections she'd built, an invitation to join the Elder Council's territorial exchange, a year-long circuit of the allied packs, serving as a representative of the Drevon alliance. She had come to tell me herself. Stood in the herb room doorway with her golden hair braided and her eyes bright with something I recognized, the particular brightness of someone who has found the shape of their own future and recognized it. "A year," I said. "At least," she said. I looked at her. She looked at me. "Are you?" "Happy," she said. "Getting there." The smile she gave me was real. Smaller than her usual ones, but real. Which is considerably better than where I was. I crossed the room and held her. She held me back. Long enough to matter. "You stopped hiding in here," she said into my shoulder. "Mostly," I said. "Good." She pulled back. "I'll send word from each territory." "You'd better." She looked around the herb room one more time. Then at me. "I always knew you were more than you showed," she said. "I know," I said. "You told me. You didn't believe me." "I do now." She nodded. She walked out of the herb room and out of the settlement with the straight-backed, chin-up courage that had always been there and had simply needed difficulty to uncover. I watched her go until she was out of sight. And then I went to the council chamber. Because there was work to do. And I was, at last, exactly where I was supposed to be. I want to tell you the part they leave out of the stories. They tell you about the bond, the recognition, the pull, the moment when the moon makes something clear that should have been obvious all along. They tell you about the difficulty and the choice and the things that have to break before things can be built. They don't tell you about the morning after. About the specific, ordinary, entirely unspectacular beauty of a life that has room in it now. The way he leaves space for my silence and fills his own with things worth saying. The way I have learned to stand in the center of rooms. The way the council table has developed, around the place I sit, a particular quality of attention, not because I perform, but because I stopped pretending I had nothing worth saying. The way the herb beds in the spring smell like beginning. The way his heartbeat still does the thing, the finding, the recognizing, every single time. The way the moon looks, from the grove beside the binding stone, like something that has been patient for a very long time and is now, quietly, entirely satisfied. They say the moon never makes mistakes. I believe that now. Not because everything was easy. Not because no one was hurt, or no thread had to be cut, or no hard thing had to be faced with open eyes. But because the moon's version of right is not always comfortable. Sometimes it asks you to stand at the edge of everything familiar and choose, really choose, the thing that is true over the thing that is safe. Sometimes it asks the quietest person in the room to use her voice. Sometimes it builds something so precisely, so specifically, so entirely without compromise, that the only way to receive it is to stop hiding and simply be what you actually are. I was Seren. The quieter sister. The one who stood at edges. Who pressed her hand to her chest in the dark. Who climbed trees and noticed bark carvings and knew the name of every plant on 3 peaks and had been invisible for so long that she had almost forgotten there was anything to see. Almost. The moon hadn't forgotten. She never had. She had simply been waiting, with that enormous, unhurried, absolute patience, for the moment when everyone involved was ready to stop fighting what was true. And when that moment came, in a torchlit grove, beside a stone, with a thread freshly cut and space finally open. She didn't say I told you so. She simply shone. The way she always had. The way she always would. What part stayed with you the most? Was it the silence she kept, or the moment she finally spoke? Was it the choice he couldn't stop making, or the one she made for everyone but herself? Tell us. And if this story found something in you, pass it on to someone who needs to hear it.